Security. Welcome, Representative Bueller. Appreciate you being here. We have some members online, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. We're running just a touch behind already. With that, we'll turn our attention for the National Guard update. Colonel Marshall, welcome to the committee.
Well, good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for having me this morning. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Keith Marshall. I'm the legislative liaison for the Kansas Adjutant General's Department. I'm here in place of the Adjutant General, Brigadier General Vernerde. He sends his regrets. He's not able to be here as he's traveling this week. So I'll be standing in for him for at least the National Guard portion. I want to note that he will be back by Friday, though, because he promotes to Major General on Friday here at the Capitol. So that's exciting for all of us to have that finally happening. So this morning, in his absence, I'll be briefing you on the Kansas National Guard. We have Angie Morgan here, the Deputy Director for Emergency Management, who will follow me and talk about KDEM, and then Dave Young with Kansas Office of Homeland Security and Kansas Intelligence Fusion Center will have a closed session with you following that. So thank you for the opportunity to be here this morning and to discuss the great things that the Kansas National Guard is doing, that your Kansas National Guard is doing to protect the state of Kansas and to defend our great country. So the National Guard is the primary combat reserve of the United States Army and the United States Air Force. We're here with the dual missions to fight and win our nation's wars and also to defend and protect our homeland and the state of Kansas. And it's a privilege to be able to serve in that capacity in the National Guard. When disaster strikes the homeland, the National Guard stands ready to deploy at a moment's notice to protect life and property in our communities. So one of the key things that we do is our ties to the community. We maintain armories all over the state of Kansas, and that's important to who we are and what we do, and it also takes a lot of our effort and our budget. So a big part of our operations is maintaining those armories across the state. We're briefing the Joint Committee on State Building Construction tomorrow on our capital improvement plan, so I won't spend a whole lot of time talking about the facilities, but just want to highlight that tie that we have in those small towns and in the communities and the rural areas and the urban areas. And it's important for us as guardsmen to be in those communities. Those armories are an important place for our forces to gather and to train, but it's also an important tie between the military and its local community. And that tie, in the United States goes back to the founding of our country and even before the founding of our country. The National Guard is part of that unbroken chain of community members who step up and defend their community, their state, and their country. And that goes all the way back to the 1600s and 1700s in America. So it's a great thing to be able to be a part of that tradition that still continues today. So our armories are a key presence in those relationships that we have. We maintain 38 armories throughout the state, 6 field maintenance shops, and additional training and logistical facilities, bases. We have presences at McCollum Air Force Base, here at Forbes Field in Topeka, Fort Riley, Fort Leavenworth. So really all over the state of Kansas, you'll see a National Guard presence. And with all of that comes the maintenance and construction to maintain those facilities and to prepare for future missions that we have. So we have several ongoing and planned construction and maintenance projects right now. We're finishing up a new Joint Force Headquarters building here in Topeka at Forbes Field. That will open in early 2025. We're also going to break ground in 2 weeks on a new Kansas Division of Emergency Management headquarters there on Topeka Boulevard and State Emergency Operations Center. Those are both badly in need of upgrades, and that's going to provide us a great capability for the state. Last week, we closed on a land purchase near Hayes, and we're going to begin constructing a new armory in Hayes. And then we're renovating and modernizing 2 armories in Kansas City, Kansas. So it's a constant effort to continue to maintain those facilities and make sure that that it's something that our communities and our soldiers can all be proud of and continue those ties that we have in the community. We're also striving to reduce the costs of our facilities through technology improvements. Those are things like high efficiency HVAC systems, direct digital controls so they can always be controlled remotely, water line infrastructure, ground source heat pumps. We have solar projects underway in Salina and Topeka. We have future solar projects planned at Fort Leavenworth and Fort Riley. So those projects not only provide cost savings, but they also provide energy resilience and emergency power generation so we can continue our operations regardless of what's going on. So it's really important for us to have those projects going. The National Guard has had one of its busiest years on record in 2024. We've deployed over 1,100 soldiers and airmen around the world to support various operations, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when I get into the Army and Air National Guard parts of it. So in addition to building partnerships in the community, we're also building partnerships internationally. So I want to highlight the National Guard state partnership programs. This is one of the most remarkable relationship building avenues in the world. So Kansas has been partnered with the Republic of Armenia for over 20 years now, and that partnership continues to grow. The program is administered by the National Guard Bureau. It is guided by the State Department, and it's executed by the Adjutant General. So it's really a whole of government approach to support combatant commanders, security cooperation objectives, and defense policy goals in a foreign country that these states are partnered with. So as I mentioned, we've been partnered with the Republic of Armenia for over 20 years. We celebrated that in 2023, the 20-year anniversary of our partnership. This year, the Kansas National Guard led a coalition exercise with Armenia and U.S. Army Europe it's called Eagle Partner, and that was with the objective to grow the peacekeeping and stability operations partnerships between those entities. So soldiers from Kansas and Armenia training side by side strengthens the trust and friendship between the two nations, and it ensures a reliable partner for the West in a very strategically important region of the world as close as they are to Russia. We just recently, last month, celebrated the 33rd anniversary of Armenian independence from the Soviet Union. We were out in D.C. for that event with the Armenian ambassador, other senior leadership from Armenia, and in fact, the Armenian ambassador will be here on Friday for General Venerdy's promotion. So that shows how close those ties are that she would come to Kansas for that event. And then we're actively involved in helping train the Armenian Peacekeeping Brigade up to NATO standards to ensure they have interoperability with NATO peacekeeping forces as well. So a lot of great things happening on those fronts. Here closer to the home front, we've had a busy year protecting life and property here in Kansas, responding to disasters and other emergencies. Our Black Hawk helicopters from the 1st Battalion, 108th Aviation Regiment performed 166 water drops during fire suppression missions in Pottawatomie, Marshall, Riley, and Sedgwick counties. Most of those were for wildfires, but I think the one in Sedgwick County was for a recycling center, so they do more than just the wildfires. They were assisting local authorities there on a really large industrial type fire. Cyber personnel supported the Office of Information Technology Services in response to a cyber incident. Our counter-drug task force provided analytical support to 10 law enforcement agencies, leading to multiple felony arrests and seizures of drugs, cash, weapons, and vehicles totaling millions of dollars. And that's an important link for us because, as you all know, the fentanyl crisis is a national security threat for us. Over 200 Americans are killed by fentanyl every day. Companies in China produce nearly all of the fentanyl precursors, so this is where the issue is originating. The U.S. Congress Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party found that the Chinese Communist Party subsidizes manufacturing and export through tax rebates, even though it's illegal to do so in China. And the Chinese Communist Party gave monetary grants to companies openly trafficking fentanyl, even though that is illegal. So this is definitely a national security issue for us, and we're involved in that through the Counter-Drug Task Force program. The 73rd Civil Support Team is a unit that responds to weapons of mass destruction threats, and it supports civil authorities at domestic incidents involving chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear materials. They conducted 2 live missions testing suspicious substances in 2024 and provided support to hazard assessment teams at over 20 events, including NASCAR races, Wichita River Fest, large sporting events, and the Kansas State Fair. So one additional program I want to discuss before I get into our service components is the Department of Defense Starbase program. So it's imperative to national security, to the current and future of national security in the United States, to have a workforce that is strong in science, technology, engineering, and math. The Kansas National Guard sponsors the Department of Defense Starbase program, which supports those objectives. This program provides hands-on, minds-on experiences to students in those disciplines. Kansas Starbase is one of the largest programs in the country. We employ 29 full-time staff members in Kansas City, Manhattan, Salina, Topeka, and Wichita. And once our armory is complete in Hayes, we'll have a classroom for Starbase in Hayes as well. Through this program, fifth grade students engage in 25 hours of STEM curriculum at military installations, and it seeks to motivate students to explore STEM career fields as they continue their education. So getting into our service components, the Kansas National Guard has two components, the Army National Guard and the Air National Guard. The Kansas Army National Guard is commanded by Brigadier General Anthony Mohat. It's home to the 35th Infantry Division headquarters and 5 brigade-level commands. 35th Infantry Division is commanded by a Kansas Guardsman at Fort Leavenworth, Major General John Rieger, and its division artillery is the newest unit in the Kansas National Guard. It was federally recognized and activated in September 2024. It's important for our units to have similar organization, training, equipping as active duty forces. So now with the 35th Division having DIVARTY, it is brought into parity in that realm with the active duty Army divisions. So the 35th Infantry Division is one of only 8 divisions in the National Guard and one of only 18 in the U.S. Army. So it's a key component to the Army's force structure, and we're privileged to have that headquarters here in Kansas. The division maintains subordinate elements across 5 states, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Texas, and Missouri. So there's partnerships around the country in the division and its downtrace brigades and battalions. In addition to its many deployments in 2024, many other Kansas Army National Guard units conducted training and exercises in preparation for future deployments. The 130th Field Artillery Brigade participated in Operation Kansas Thunder, which is a live fire exercise with the 1st Infantry Division Artillery and the 1st Infantry Division Combat Aviation Brigade at Fort Riley. The 635th Regional Support Group participated in the Eagle Partner exercise that I referenced earlier in Armenia, and continuing to help grow that partnership internationally. So these are just a couple of the snapshots of the robust training and exercises that occurred across the Kansas Army National Guard in 2024. The Kansas Air National Guard is commanded by Brigadier General Jason Kenobi. It has 2 wings, the 190th Air Refueling Wing at Forbes Field in Topeka, and the 184th Wing at McConnell Air Force Base in Wichita. The 190th Air Refueling Wing operates and maintains a fleet of 12 KC-135R Stratotanker refueling aircraft, and its mission is to provide rapid global mobility air power and deploy expeditionary forces in support of worldwide combat, contingency, and humanitarian operations. And they also have a nuclear deterrence mission. So if you heard the news last week, Forbes Field and the 190th Air Refueling Wing was just selected as one of 7 units to move forward in the competition for the KC-46 basing decision. So we are hoping that a year from now we will be named the main operating base number 7 for the KC-46. We're in competition with 6 other states and Guard units for that. So that was definitely good news for us, and we'll continue in the competition. So the 190th deployed aircraft and personnel around the world in 2024, including support to U.S. Air Forces in Europe, exercise or mission called Copper Arrow. Copper Arrow demonstrates U.S. European Command's efforts to bolster security on NATO's eastern flank with forward station and deployed forces. And it's a great combination of active duty and reserve component forces to show that strength and that unity of action in Eastern Europe. The 184th Wing down in Wichita provides combat-ready capability air combat command in 9 combatant commands around the world through globally integrated intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, cutting-edge cybersecurity, and battlefield command and control. In 2024, the 184th Wing mobilized and deployed personnel in support of contingency operations during the Wing's deployment cycle to Europe, Africa, the Middle East, and other locations around the world. And additionally, the Wing mobilized nearly 100 airmen who remained in Kansas performing in-place intelligence and cybersecurity missions. So they had a busy year as well. So I want to talk a little bit about the 2024 legislative session that we just had. Thanks to your support and your work, we had a very successful legislative session in 2024 advocating for things that impact our National Guardsmen, our force, and our families in Kansas. We were able to secure 5 new mission-critical full-time positions. Most of those are civilian analyst and cyber positions that will help us counter and respond to threats here in Kansas. We conducted a massive overhaul of the Kansas Code of Military Justice and the Kansas National Guard administrative statutes for the first time in decades. Some of those had not been updated since the Civil War, so it was long past time to look at those and bring those up to current standards. So Thanks to your efforts, commanders now have the 21st century legal and administrative organizational tools so they can properly organize, train, and equip their forces to meet their missions. And our statutes in Kansas are now aligned with the Uniform Code of Military Justice on the federal side as well. We were also part of the effort for the workers' compensation bill. And prior to that bill, when our guardsmen were called to state active duty by the governor, they're not covered under federal military benefits. So if they were injured or killed in the line of duty on state active duty, the benefits that they and their family would receive were just completely inadequate. And so thanks to a great partnership with the Kansas Department of Labor and other stakeholders, we were able to include the Kansas National Guard in the workers' compensation bill. So when they are called to state active duty, they're now included in the state workers' compensation program. So that is a great move forward for our guardsmen and for their families as well. We also passed the Educational Masters for Enhanced Readiness and Global Excellence program, also known as EMERGE. What this program does is it funds master's degrees for Kansas National Guard personnel. So 36 states already had a program similar to this. Those are states that we're constantly in competition for when it comes to recruiting and retention. Our guardsmen are always watching the benefits that other states have, and if they can get a better deal somewhere else, they may go to that other state. So we're always looking at what our neighboring states are doing and trying to make sure that we're still relevant and offering those things that our soldiers and our airmen are looking for as benefits to their service. We have 23 people in this program, even though there was a very short deadline between when that came law and the fall semester. There are 23 people using that program already to pursue their master's degree, including 13 enlisted members. So it's not just officers that are taking care of those advanced educational opportunities, it's the enlisted force as well. And that's a great thing for us as we want to maintain the highest educated military force in the world. That's one of the distinctions that we have as Americans, is especially our NCO Corps is the most professional, highest educated in the world. So thank you for helping us with that. We worked with various stakeholders on employment initiatives, including licensing compacts that make it easier for military spouses and National Guardsmen to obtain employment in Kansas. And we anticipate continuing these efforts in 2025. We're pursuing broadly popular initiatives in education, employment, child care, health care that help build the readiness of our force. And through these initiatives and partnerships, we strive to make Kansas the best place to serve in the National Guard, the best place to work, the best place to raise our family. And so I just want to thank you for your assistance in all those efforts and look forward to working with you in 2025 as we continue that. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I will stand for your questions at the appropriate time.
Committee questions? Representative Bueller.
Thank you, Colonel. This might be a nit, but I think I heard you say that the Guard actually did 2 actual CBRN missions this last year. What were those?
Sir, I don't have the date on that, but I will get back with you on that.
I'm just curious. That doesn't seem to resonate.
So a lot of times it's a false alarm. So they'll respond to it, they'll test the material, and it'll turn out to be a false alarm. But I'll find that out and get back with you.
Just curious. Thank you,
sir.
Mr. Chair.
Any further questions for Lieutenant Colonel? See none. Thank you. Excellent presentation.
Thank you, sir.
On a personal privilege, Representative Smith.
I'd like to recognize my daughter, Erica, and her husband, Colton, and my grandson, Grant, who are up here from Georgia. I've been here for 8 years, and this is the first time they could make a committee meeting. So just wanted to recognize them in the room.
Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and committee members. I'm Angie Morgan. I'm the Kansas Division of Emergency Management Deputy Director. I serve at the direction of General Vernerde as his role as Director of Emergency Management. We are a small group of state agency workers, around 50. We're all civilians within the Adjutant General's Department, and we focus around mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. So much like our military partners, we do a lot of planning, training for first responders and emergency managers, the private sector, the citizens as well. And then we are in charge of the State Emergency Operations Center, the coordination of those resources from the county level through the federal level, and then, of course, recovery, and then mitigation, which we are preparing for that next hazard and trying to lessen the impacts of that disaster. We primarily work with the Federal Emergency Management Agency, where we receive guidance, and then our foundation for our state response is the Kansas Response Plan and our emergency support functions, which are also private industry, primarily state agencies and voluntary agencies. We've been very busy this year. Since January of 2024, we have had 4 major presidential declarations for the Public Assistance Program and numerous other state disaster response for severe storms and wildfires that didn't result in a federal disaster declaration. The Public Assistance Program authorized through the Stafford Act to FEMA is administered by the Kansas Division of Emergency Management, and it provides cost assistance to eligible applicants for damages that were incurred as a result of a federally declared disaster. There's a cost share of 75-25, and you have to be eligible for those. So I think in your handouts, it shows the number of disasters that are currently open that we're working. As I mentioned, we've had 4 since January of this year. We also worked and did damage assessment on an additional 3 that were just short of our state threshold. So we're currently managing 12 open with an additional 3 that are in closeout. So we have quite a big caseload just on recovery. In addition to the federal disasters that we were able to get through FEMA, the Small Business Administration also has a disaster loan for disaster recovery loans for businesses, individuals, homeowners, and renters. The Westmoreland tornado in Pottawatomie County was declared for Small Business Administration loans. And in addition, the Small Business Administration agency changed their criteria for disasters. And if we find one destroyed or major home within a major presidential declaration, we're able to take advantage of what they call the rural disaster loan. We were able to find those for Allen, Bourbon, Lynn, and Pottawatomie. In addition, last Friday, we asked that Harvey be added because of our new declaration, and that was granted yesterday. I might mention that the recent disaster also, we were able to add 3 counties, and those were approved yesterday by FEMA. We've been busy the last couple of weeks supporting the states for Hurricane Helene and now Milton. We've worked very closely with the Office of the State Fire Marshal, and we've been able to send 1 Swiftwater task force search and rescue team. First, they went to Florida, and then when that mission was over, they were deployed to North Carolina. That team should come back safe and sound tonight. In addition, over the weekend, we received another request for Florida for Hurricane Milton. That team left yesterday. It's going to be a composition of both of some of the members that were in North Carolina and then some new members. And they should arrive at their destination today. And then they'll be given their assignment tomorrow in Florida. The missions for these have been quite difficult, very much self-sustaining, no lodging, no comms, nothing. So we're very proud of the task force that we're able to send from Kansas, and we continue to monitor the open request and also work with our Kansas National Guard partners. I checked a little while ago, and most of the missions have been filled on the military side, but we'll continue to monitor those, and hopefully we'll be able to send additional resources should any of the conditions approve for it's safe to send our people. Last fall, I mentioned our continuity of operations planning based on the executive order that Governor Kelly asks all the cabinet agencies and executive agencies to have continuity of operations plans submitted to KDM and approved by December 31st of last year. All 16 made that deadline, and they are now into their cycle of updating those, and that's on schedule. In addition, some of those agencies are also exercising with not only tabletop exercises, but with functional exercises to ensure that their off-site operations and capabilities also work. The COOP Planning Committee that we have meets quarterly. There's 20 members, chartered members on that. In addition, we are supporting the judicial branch. They made an internal mandate for their agencies and courts to have COOP plans, and that was extended to 2023 to coincide with the deadline that the governor gave, and we're providing assistance for those individuals as well. One thing that we are concerned about is federal funding cuts. This year, we received a 10.1 reduction in our emergency management performance grant, which we passed on to our counties. And that is mainly our operations costs for personnel, training, exercise, operational stuff that keeps us going. There's a 50-50 match on that, and we're hoping that it will be restored. It is in the appropriations bill and I believe on the House side, but we are very fearful based on the amount of disasters that our country is seeing and the mood, so to speak, of Congress. In addition to that 10.1% cut that we're expecting, they're also talking about going back to base levels of 2019. So I'm not sure what impact that will have, but we've had a couple of supplementals with growth on that. So that is what we are challenged with in the future. For that, I'll stand for questions.
Committee questions. Representative Thompson.
When we talked about communications gaps when they deploy, do they have SATCOM gear, or how does that work?
We have several types of communication systems for backup, including the 800 megahertz radio, and then we have satellite capabilities. I actually deployed and worked 3 hurricanes in 2004 in Florida, and we had to use satellite phones as our primary source of communication.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Any further questions? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your presentation. I was looking at the federal disasters open designations, and then below that, about the SBA, which you were talking about. You have counties that are eligible for SBA loans this year are Allen, Bourbon, Lynn, and Potawatomi counties. I noticed that 3 of those are like in the southeast part of the state, and Potawatomi is kind of like northwest of here. Can you give me a brief description on what the disasters were that they would
Sure.
qualify for?
They kind of blend in together. So the Potawatomi County was the Westmoreland tornado. That was earlier this year. I believe that was the April 25th through April 30th timeframe. And that's a traditional small business administration loan program. So the new law that allows the rural disaster loan program is a result of the major presidential declarations. So Harvey was just declared yesterday, so that was the severe storms and straight line winds, flooding from June 26th to June 7th, and that was a tornado that hit, trying to think of the city, but it was in Harvey County. And then Allen, Bourbon, and Lynn were a result of the disaster on May 19th, and that was primarily due to flooding.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And if you want more accurate information, I'm happy to follow up on the exact dates. But I think that's true. So many of them were in each disaster. And then there were 2 incident periods that we didn't get, or that were also, people were impacted. So, but but I'm happy to follow up.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Committee for their questions.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate your presentation. Next up, we have David Young. You have closed and non-closed presentation?
Close.
Do you know how long you're expecting it to need?
I think we were scheduled for an hour, but
Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that the open meeting of the Joint Committee on Kansas Security be recessed for a closed executive meeting pursuant to KSA 75-4319A to discuss matters related to the Kansas Intelligent Fusion Center's security measures with the appropriate individuals pursuant to KSA 75-4319B12C, because the discussion of such matters in an open meeting would jeopardize such security measures, that the committee resume the open meeting in room 548S South of the State House in 50 minutes, which would put it at approximately 10:27, and to record this motion if adopted as part of the committee's permanent records.
We have a second. Seconded by Senator Peck. Gonna get started again. Running a little ahead of schedule. That's a great thing. First up, we have a presentation from Brian Caskey, Election Security. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Brian Caskey. For those of you who do not know me, I'm the Director of Elections for the Secretary of State's office, and I have been the director for nine years, I think. I'm sorry, I've lost track. It's a lot of elections. And this is not my first time before you, but I'm here to provide an update. I just need to get the right talking points. And as always, feel free to interrupt me with questions as we move along. So I am here in the capacity as the Secretary of State's office, and I just want to touch, I have written remarks in front of you. I just want to touch on some of them briefly. I'm not going to go over everything in there. But first, thank you again for the opportunity. We are officially 4 weeks away from General Election Day. We are actually 8 days away from this election beginning in earnest. We actually started 45 days prior to Election Day about 2 weeks ago with military voters. We have about 1,000 ballots already out the door and several hundred already returned. So the election is ongoing. We will have tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of ballots out the door 1 week from tomorrow. So we, although we are 4 weeks away from Election Day, we are fully immersed in this election. So a couple things I want to point out first. Kansas has a decentralized election administration structure, meaning counties run elections. The Secretary of State is the chief state election official. We oversee everything, but our role is pretty limited to specific tasks within state law. Counties run elections. The first thing I want to touch base on is a quick reminder on one of the reasons why I'm here. In January of 2017, Department of Homeland Security Chief at that time, Jay Johnson, declared that election administration was critical to the nation's infrastructure, and we were officially designated as a critical infrastructure sector in January of 2017, meaning we should be treated just like utility companies, telecom, transportation, healthcare. We are now viewed in the same light as critical to the nation's operation as those are. Since then, President Trump at the time and President Biden have affirmed that election administration is still critical infrastructure. And so that has added some responsibilities and some resources to go along with that. And basically, we act a lot more like utility companies now than when I first started working in elections a long time ago. So that's just a quick reminder. That's not anything new, but that's one of the reasons why I'm here. I do want provide you a few highlights on specific things we're doing. First, I want to talk about our statewide voter registration system. We have had a statewide voter registration system since 2006. We administer the system, but is accessed locally at each of the 105 county election offices. So each election office accesses that system. We use a nationally recognized vendor. There's only a handful of them, but we do use one of the leading vendors in this space. And this vendor is also recognized as having one of the most secure statewide voter registration systems there is in the market. They use both internal and external resources to monitor, to protect, and to test their system at all times, as well as all of our backup systems. Separate from them, we have a separate partnership with a nationally known cybersecurity company where we have worked with them to provide threat monitoring at each of the 105 county election offices. So we have, through this company, we have provided protection and monitoring at each of the location sites where counties access our system. So we are always watching who is hitting our system, when, and protecting them from threats both inside and outside. And then third, we have required multi-factor authentication to access the system at every location anywhere in the state. We know exactly who is touching our system, how they are touching our system, when, and then once they're inside, what they're doing. So those are the three main components of our statewide voter registration system. Next, I want to talk about vote counting, something that all of us are interested in. Specifically, the security of our vote tabulation computers. Every county has a computer that has software on it that counts the votes. Every county has one. So in 2005, the county election officers, with our encouragement, adopted a policy that prohibited any voting device, including the computer that has their vote tabulation software, from touching the internet. That has been policy since 2005. In 2021, the legislature passed a law putting that into the law, not just a policy. So that's been the law since 2021. Again, every county has a computer that has tabulation software on it. That computer must be a standalone computer. It cannot have anything on there other than operating software and the tabulation software. No Internet Explorer, no Firefox, no Edge, no email, nothing that connects to the internet, just the operating system and that software. And to pull the voting results off of that computer, you have to have a device. You can't email it across, you can't connect it to an internal network. That has to be all by itself in a room that's secured, locked, and monitored. Like, you can't get to that computer unless you are given explicit access to one and only one person with someone else who is monitoring. So that law's been in effect since 2021. And then the third thing I want to talk about are county election networks. If you remember, counties run elections, and so each county is ultimately responsible for their own county-owned networks. The state is not responsible for that. However, as I mentioned earlier, we work with a nationwide company, and we provide endpoint protection and monitoring on every network that uses a computer that touches the statewide voter registration system. We also work with the Department of Homeland Security, and although we don't mandate it, we strongly encourage each county to have a working relationship with DHS. The last time I knew, there were 30 to 40 counties that had DHS resources on site or had done external tests and review of county networks. And so especially probably the 20 largest counties, all have had DHS in their buildings looking at their networks, offering guidance and providing suggestions to make sure that their networks are strengthened and hardened against any attacks. So that's where we are there. We talked a little bit about this last year, but earlier this year, we promulgated new security regulations. They're not new, they're updated, but we added quite a few new security requirements through these regs. Some of the highlights are each facility that has voting equipment must be controlled access only with a log of everyone who's been inside the facility, and at no time should only one person be inside the facility. That seems pretty common sense. Some of the smaller counties have had a little bit of difficulty because they only have 2 or 3 employees, and if we mandate at least 2, that leaves them a little shorthanded, but although they've grumbled a little bit, all of them are doing it, and they're being creative in how they do that with bringing in employees from other county departments, but no one gets inside that facility unless there's a log, there's a key card access, there's controlled access, and you can never have just one person inside the room. Second, every facility must have video camera monitoring along with fire alarm protection and temperature controls at all times. So every one of our counties has a room or a facility that has that. In addition, they must have up-to-date inventory on every device at all times. That includes each time that device has been used, where it was used, as well as any type of repair or update that was placed on that device. That must be maintained at all times. We've talked about the standalone computer with the vote tabulation software. We have required that every staff member have unique login credentials. You can't just have credentials for the county anymore. Everyone within the county must have their own unique credentials. Everything must be in rooms with secured access, and that access must be reviewed. And then lastly, there must be a log of everything that's done on every computer as it relates to programming ballots and logging computer results. So those are some of the highlights on there. Pardon me just a second here. And then shifting gears a little bit, last fall we had announced a physical security grant program. I'm here to say that that program has mostly been completed. We offered federal HAVA security grant funds to all counties for the express purpose of physical security, upgrades to their buildings, to their secure storage areas, focusing on how to secure it, both the equipment, the people, the offices, staff. So we required counties to submit applications to us, and we also required each county must provide 10% of the total amount they requested. As of this moment, 84 counties submitted requests. 70 plus of those have already been fulfilled completely. The rest have been partially fulfilled. Some things have been put on back order. Most of the requests were for security cameras for drop boxes in their equipment storage areas. A lot of them, counties asked for secured cages and cabinets for the storage of their voting equipment within their facilities. A lot of controlled access equipment and software to make sure that they had a log of everyone who's walking in and out the door, and then just some enhanced security measures for their actual offices themselves. We have spent well over $1 million on this. I suspect that we will evaluate this after this election and probably continue this in the future after we get through this election and understand more what kind of threat environment we are in after this election. So in conclusion, I've touched on the high points of what we're doing, continuous monitoring, detection, and response to any attempts at the statewide voter registration system at both the state level and the county level, providing well over $1 million in security grants for physical security. I haven't touched on this, but myself and the secretary both have security clearances, and we meet regularly both at the State Fusion Center and in Washington, D.C. and other areas across the country with representatives of DHS, CISA, FBI, KBI. I was talking to Rick earlier. I don't think a week hasn't gone by since, I would say, 1st of July that I haven't been on a briefing somewhere with someone about something about this election. So we spend a lot of time meeting with all of our partners, federal and state. We are aware of all the threats the feds are aware of, both nationally and locally. So I did want to touch on that. And then we are requiring our counties to update their continuity of operation plans, their COOP plans. The 4 counties that are appointed by the secretary all have provided those to us, and we are reviewing those and offering tweaks to them. But we are asking everyone to make sure that their COOP plan is live and ready to go, dusted off, because you never know. We don't know what's going to happen in November and beyond. So that's what I have for an update. I'm happy to answer any questions anyone has.
Committee questions? Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony. I heard some conversation, and just to have some context, is the Secretary of State considering any information or any resource out there using AI in our elections?
So the Secretary of State's office is not using AI in anything that we're doing currently. We are concerned about information that is provided by AI. I think that's a conversation that we all need to have after this election. But for this election, we are not using AI. As far as I know, we are not using AI in any capacity. You're hearing directly from what the Secretary says, what I have to say from our staff. It's us. It's not anything AI generated.
That's good information. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Further questions? Senator Peck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned that since 2005, there was a statewide policy, and then in 2021, there was legislation passed regarding the tabulation computers and not being able to be connected to the internet in any way, shape, or form. My question, does the Secretary of State's office audit each county or randomly audit counties? And how do we know that they're, I don't expect this, I don't think this, and I'm not accusing anyone, but how do we know that there isn't some rogue county clerk out there that's using a computer for tabulation that can or has been hooked to the internet?
Great question, Senator. So my response is, since 2023, the legislature granted the Secretary of State procedural audit authority. So we did one in 2023 where we basically go in and review all of the policies like this. We will do that again after this election. It is a random audit where we randomly we'll select one of the big 4. Then the next 2 counties will do a medium-sized county and a small county. And then we will physically go on site, and we have a checklist, and our checklist will look different than last time because of the nature of the presidential election, where absolutely we will randomly select counties and see exactly what you're asking me. So yes, it's random and it's not all, but we are doing that after this election.
And for several years, switching gears just a little bit, but also along the line of auditing, counties are required to select randomly, draw out of a hat, if you will, a precinct to hand count. And do they report that to the Secretary of State's office? And do you have the authority, or do you audit or verify that these were randomly selected and that the results were what they say they were? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Great question. So let me go over the whole audit process. So after this election, the law mandates that the Secretary of State choose a federal race, a legislative race, and a local race to be audited by hand. So on the morning after the election, our office will have a live streamed, available to the press event where we will go through all 105 counties, and we will literally pull out different races out of a hat for each county. We will send those to the county. The next day, they are required to publish their draw publicly, as it's supposed to be a public record. So my answer to that is required to be done in a public setting, and almost every county has someone from the public there to watch. Not everyone, but most do. It has to be done publicly, where they draw their precincts, then they complete their hand count. They're required to provide that information to us. Our office makes them, like, they cannot do their county canvass until our office is given approval that their audit is complete and accurate. So if They report to us exactly what the results are. If there are any discrepancies, even if it's just one off, we require them to provide an explanation. And I can tell you, if they do not have an explanation, we make them do another precinct, another 2 precincts. Like 1 is what the law requires. Our office often will ask counties to do more if there's something that they can't. Like if a voter put a slash through an oval and they don't agree on what the slash means, we will make them do another precinct just to make sure that everything counts right. And so we've done that in every election. We will do that in this election. I think there's 6 elections we've done so far. Every election, every county, the audit has been 100% to 100%. Sometimes we make them do more to get to that, but we will not approve something if there's even a chance of a question that something wasn't counted accurately.
Senator Clues.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Brian, for what you do. Just kind of a follow-up from Senator Peck. In the audits that have been done, the process, we've seen the process in handling needing noted improvement. With no internet connection, can you just speak to the data stored, okay, on the machines themselves? There's got to be some sort of an external stick drive to take that information, and where, when, and how is that process? If you could just speak to that a moment, completed.
Sure. And so each county will do this somewhat differently based on their type of who their vendor is and what their tabulation software does. So you have the standalone computer. You must have a memory stick or some other storage stick to take the results and put them from the voting equipment into the tabulation software, tabulate it, and then take the results off that. So everyone has a stick of some sort. And so every county is required to track the location. They're supposed to have a log of who touches it, where it goes, and it must be secured at all times. So they have locked, sealed bags on those sticks for where they put after the sticks are removed from the central computer. The board workers on election night, once they leave their polling place, they have the sticks from the voting equipment in locked, sealed bags, and then they take those to the central office. There's a chain of custody form that both the board worker has to sign and the election office has to sign, transmitting possession of that bag from the board worker to the office, then from the office to the computer, and back to the office. And so they have to be sealed at all times. They have to be logged at all times of who exactly has those in their possession at what time.
Chairman, just one follow-up. Thank you for that. And could you just speak briefly to that particular stick? Is that stick given by the vendor that handles that particular machine? Where does that stick come from?
From the election office.
From the
election office. They purchase sticks. They can do it off the shelf commercially. They can do it from the vendor. But the sticks themselves are always owned by and maintained by the county, not the vendor.
Okay, but not the Secretary of State.
We have no involvement in those. The counties do not send us the sticks or storage devices. Those have to be held locally.
So do we have any track record on where those sticks are obtained?
The state does not. Those are kept at the county.
Does the county have any track record on where those sticks are obtained?
Yes, the county purchases those. So yes, they know exactly where they got, who they bought them from.
Typically, where would those come from?
Again, some of them could be commercial off the shelf, like name a tech company, Best Buy, Walmart. Some of them buy them from the vendor. It depends on what their software requires and what's required of those memory sticks. Some of them are more specialized than others.
So has there ever been, just to follow up, an audit concerning that process right there, that piece on when we're saying they could literally go to a Walmart or go to a Best Buy and purchase a memory stick? I'm I'm just concerned on that process there, and who verifies that?
The county verifies that.
How many individuals verify that?
Depends on the county. Some counties are larger and have more resources. Smaller counties only have 2 or 3 employees in their election office.
Thank you.
Committee, further questions? Seeing none, thank you, Brian. Appreciate your presentation.
Thank you very much. And good luck. Oh,
Representative Owsley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not a question. I just wanted to thank you for the update on the audit. I know a lot of work went into getting that legislation put in, and I know improvements have been made. And you said, if I heard correctly, 6 election cycles with 100%, auditable. And I think that's great news, and thank you for sharing it with the committee.
you're welcome. Thank you very much.
Next up, we have Mr. FIFO. You'd like to state your name and your title?
Hello, my name is Rick Pifo. I'm the Harvey County Clerk and Election Officer. I'm also the president of the Kansas County Clerks and Election Officials Association. It's a mouthful, but KCCOA for short. Or I'm the president this year. I'm also the chair of our legislative or elections committee, and I've testified in front of a number of you and some other committees. I'm sure you're aware that in Kansas we have 101 elected county clerks. The 4 largest counties have an elected county clerk, or I'm sorry, we have 105 elected. But the 4 largest counties also have a election commissioner. So we have 109 members. Most of us, being also county clerks, have a lot of other duties besides just elections. So we do tax roll, including a special assessments. We attend commission meetings, sell fish and game licenses, boat licenses. There's a lot of duties that we do. So elections is one of those. This time of year it becomes, well, I would say it becomes our main focus, but you have to remember that the tax roll is due to the treasurer November 1. Guess what? We have an election first Tuesday following the first Monday in November every year. So October is a very busy month for all of us. We have a legislative platform that we have adopted that says we support initiatives which build on already secure and transparent election equipment and processes. Security is one of those things that unfortunately it is taking more of our time, not necessarily to change our practices, but a lot of the documentation takes a lot more time. So things that we may have been always doing, but maybe not sufficiently documenting, now we're being required to provide more document. There's more scrutiny on all of our security. And security is a lens that we have to use for every decision we make now, more and more now than it has been in the past. I've been doing this, I've been the county clerk since 2014, but all of this security and scrutiny of all of our practices has ramped up over that time period. You know, I mean, we've always had a locked room for our equipment and stuff. Now we have to have cameras in them and have, you know, more documented access to the rooms and stuff like that. You know, like I said, not that we weren't handling our security before, now we're just having to prove that we're handling it. Like Brian said, elections are critical infrastructure, which part of that, there's some federal programs that were started, CISA, and then there's the EI-ISAC, which provides information to us. It's something that I think we've all signed up for. We get all these emails of threats and things that to be watching for. But honestly, there's a lot of information that comes at us, but not a lot of time or resources to really digest all of that information and act on every single item with all of the other duties. Like I said, we have to prioritize and have security be one of the factors in all of our decisions. But and then we have there's multiple factors as far as security. We've got the cybersecurity. We got to protect all the data, and like Brian said, we've got Elvis. There's multi-factor authentication to get into that. We can only do it on our county networks. We, at our county, we also have multi-factor authentication to get onto our county network. You know, and then we, in our county, we have a company that we've hired for managed IT. We chose for a county our size, we couldn't really justify adding the number of staff and resources it would take to protect all of our networks. So we have a company that we've hired. A number of companies do this, but a lot of counties don't have those resources. And in some cases, the county clerk is the IT director also, on top of their elections and tax roll duties. And so I think that's the biggest problem with security for us is the resources, not just, or resources of time and funding. I'm sure you're aware that the state does not provide any funding to counties to run elections. It's all on tax dollars, basically. And property taxes is the main source of revenue for counties. There are occasionally times where federal funding will come down through the Secretary of State's office for some of these programs, like the physical security grant program that they did. We also have to, so we have physical security of the equipment and the machines that program and tabulate. In my case, we already had a secure room. We did some upgrades to the room. I added some more cameras. Now in a room that's smaller than this one, I've got 3 cameras with all that equipment in there. But we also have to now be concerned also of personal security. I have to be worried about my safety and the safety of my staff and poll workers with reports of threats throughout the country of people threatening physical violence against poll workers and election workers. So, like I said, it's an issue of resources, time and money, and priority. Some of the things that were brought up, I know you haven't asked me specifically, but some of the things like the sticks, the memory sticks. For one thing, the vendors are all, there's 4, I think, certified equipment vendors in Kansas. All of them have to certify that their equipment does not touch the internet. We've got that certification. Our tabulation hardware is hardened to make sure that it can't be connected to the internet. Even if you were to plug a cable in, the port has been disabled basically and is hardened to make sure that it doesn't. Those memory sticks, they may be purchased off the shelf, but our post-election audits prove that the system works, so that showing that those drives have not been tampered with, I guess. And in our case, at least, and I think it's the same in other counties, is those sticks only move within the equipment in the election system. So they go from the ballot, the precinct counting device to the tabulation device. They never go into a computer that's connected on the internet. And in our case, I think it's the same in others, on election night when we're doing tabulation, of course, we have to get reports that we do post on the internet. So we have a series of sticks that basically only go one direction. They're new, out of the box. They're put into the tabulation system to get the results or a report of the results off. That goes into my computer that I use to post the results on our website, but it never goes back into the tabulation computer. So if that device has ever been put into a computer connected to the internet, it doesn't go back into the protected loop system. And we call it's a Nike net. I mean, you're using a drive and you're physically transporting it from one person to the other. I think I've provided written testimony, but I'm not going to read through all of it. But I would suggest, I've got the very, very end, that possibly if the state is ramping up IT resources, I know there's some legislation introduced, that it's great to have all the warnings and everything from EAI, SAC, and CISA, but sometimes it's hard to actually react to those and act on what you've heard. So having, in my case, we use our managed IT, I make sure that they attend all of those briefings and that they are implementing actions to protect us against the threat. So that's what I'm saying. I mean, if there was some resources to actually protect us against the threats or act on the information that's provided. But otherwise, I would stand for questions.
Any questions? Smith. Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you and the county clerks and election officers who have had a questioning attitude throughout this. You know, since 2016, when we began at almost 4 years straight investigation into Russian collusion over our president getting elected, and spending all of our legal, our law enforcement, and our intelligence resources on that for almost 4 years straight. And then we go into questioning about Dominion and some other resources. You know, I think when I talk to folks who question whether or not we have election security, the thing that strikes me is the most important thing is that we feel confident that we have secure elections. You guys are on the front line of protecting a constitutional republic, and we're not going to have one if we don't believe that our elected officials are officially elected. So I appreciate those who look at it from a perspective of, I want to know that what we're doing is correct. I want to know that what we're doing is secure, rather than it can't happen. When I hear it can't happen, I think of, and as a law enforcement officer, I'm going to tell you, I understand people in the public scrutiny, right? And constantly being questioned about how we do our business. It comes with the title, I guess, you know. Folks need to feel secure. And I know that there have been a majority of you all who have been very vocal and very transparent about that. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Cluse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Rick, for your testimony, and thank you for what you do. Next to property taxes, I think this is probably one of the biggest issues that I get confronted by. Questions on election security have sat on numerous committees, joint committees, over the last few years. And perception can, as Representative Smith was saying, become reality, right, wrong, or indifferent on that. And making sure that perception and bringing the confidence in election is so important. And that's the only reason I'm asking some of these questions. I think we have come a long ways, and the audits have spoken to that chain of command and the process. And So seeing where we have doubled up and two people being in a private room, this, that, and the other. But it still comes back to this stick thing that kind of gives me a little bit of heartburn. And, well, I haven't heard, well, two people go down and get this box of sticks off of the Walmart shelf or the Best Buy shelf. I mean, it's an area that I have looked at just about every area, being, like I said, and hearing testimony from countless amount of people. It's just an area that we really haven't fully addressed nor audited on how these sticks are obtained. And obviously, we want to give the best to people, and we don't have bad characters in play. But this is a security issue, and elections, especially in this day, speak to everyone. So I think that's something that we do need to look at, and how these sticks are acquired, and do we have two people in the room? I mean, if you have sticks that get purchased from someone, one individual, bringing them in, we can all just assume that, okay, these sticks are all, they're brand new out of the box. Here again, I'm not trying to say something's there that really isn't. I'm just saying in the process, these are things that I hear and things that come up to me, and this is why we have these meetings and these audits done, so we can feel confident in our elections. So thank you for your time today and for your testimony.
Thank you.
Senator Ware.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what I'm hearing you say is that you're confident that your processes and procedures make for a secure election, and you believe that all of your cohorts do as well, but that you feel like you've been handed some unfunded mandates, and to continue to have confidence in secure elections, a little help would be beneficial.
That's correct. I mean, most of us run on really short staffs. I mean, my county has a population in the 35,000 area. I have 4 total people in my office to run elections. I forgot to mention, we also do accounts payable. Many county clerks do all the human resources. A lot of the smaller counties only have 2 people. So it's a personnel resource, and if you start adding a lot more paperwork, then it takes more time. So yes, it's a resource issue.
Any further questions? Seeing none. Thank you for your hard work. We appreciate the clerks that participated with post audit in the elections, that ones that were allowed post audit in went well.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Well, committee, it looks like we're finishing up a little early. Looks like a good time to break for lunch. I think we'll go till 1:05. We'll be in recess for lunch till 1:05. Get started. I know we'll have some more coming in. Thank you, Samir. First up, we have Merle Rydell, Kansas Highway Patrol update. Welcome to the committee. On that side of the podium.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yep, and I'm excited to see members again. I am a previous employee of KLRD, so it's new and exciting to be on this side of the dais. At least for me, it is. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Merle Riedel, and I am the Executive Officer for the Kansas Highway Patrol. I want to thank the committee for this opportunity to review the Highway Patrol's operations and future initiatives concerning security. So joining me today, we do have Major Wes Ludoff, who's the Executive Commander for Technical Operations Bureau. We have Major Brett Johnson, Executive Commander for the Protective Services Bureau. We have Sherry Mackey, Deputy Secretary for Administrative Services, and Brandon Bixel, Commander for the Capitol Police. And I will be, hopefully you have a copy of this, a slideshow in front of you that's got the Highway Patrol at the front. So I will be referencing that. And there should be hopefully a slide deck that can be projected for members. So I think we're ready for the next slide. Just a quick review of our mission and duties. Highway Patrol is a state law enforcement agency established in 1937. Kind of unique to our agency is our law enforcement officers have statewide law enforcement authority. We are devoted to improving the quality of life in Kansas through spirited and dedicated service, and we take that role very seriously. Next slide, please. On the next slide, you can see just a sampling of some of our statutory duties at the Highway Patrol. These include traffic safety on the highways, laws pertaining to motor carriers, security within the Capitol complex, policing on the turnpike, security for the governor, counterterrorism efforts with state and local entities, and the recovery of stolen vehicles through the Vehicle Identification Number, or VIN, inspections. And those are for vehicles that are recently titled in Kansas. Next slide, please. So now that we've talked a little bit about what the agency is and what it does, I want to review some of our recent operations. Here you can see this slide captures some of the work of Highway Patrol. We'll talk about 2023, and then we'll kind of review 2024. So some of the stats you'll see is firearms seized in 2023 were 36. And these are firearms that are seized during law enforcement encounters. Firearms are typically seized because they were either used in a crime or in possession of a convicted felon, or the serial number was altered, or the firearm was reported stolen. Under the category fentanyl seized, you'll see 62 pounds. And these seizures typically occur during roadside encounters. And if you kind of do the math, 62 pounds of fentanyl equates to about 281,480 pills of fentanyl that has been seized and taken out of circulation on the streets. You can see under felony arrests for FY 2023, that totals 2,070 felony arrests conducted by the Highway Patrol. Under DUI arrests is 1,288. Speeding citations issued is 54,258. And injury and felony crashes is 1,755. And that total number of felony and injury crashes, that includes 213 fatal crashes and 1,562 injury crashes. If we move to the next slide, please. So we're going to take a look at the numbers for 2024. So we reviewed 2023, 12 months of 2023. So these are statistics for 6 months during 2024. And so you can see a percentage there also associated with each of those stats, and that kind of gives comparison of where that number is in relation to the prior year. So firearms seized in 2024 is 12, which is 33% of the amount seized in 2024. Under fentanyl seized, you'll see 199 pounds. That's an increase of 321% above 2023. So that's a significant increase. There's really two cases that kind of drove that large amount. In January 2024, there was 40 pounds of fentanyl pills seized en route from Phoenix, Arizona to Wichita, Kansas, and that was seized by the Highway Patrol. In April 2024, 110 pounds of fentanyl pills were seized en route from Phoenix, Arizona to Atlanta, Georgia. So that kind of describes why that number is significantly larger than 2023. Moving on to felony arrest, the Highway Patrol during the first 6 months of 2024 executed 1,343 felony arrests. DUI arrests were 600 for the first 6 months. Speeding citations, 25,883, and fatal injuries and fatal crashes is 915. So you'll see for many of those categories, With exception to the fentanyl category, we're largely on track or in comparison with the previous year. Moving on to the next slide. So you'll see under organizational realignment, one of the efforts for the Highway Patrol in 2024 was a reorganization, and that really was done to better align our units with similar functions. So just want to briefly describe some of those functions of the Highway Patrol that were part of that reorganization. We have the Special Operations Bureau, and that might include what you would consider sort of the traditional troopers, road troopers conducting traffic safety services among 7 regions in the state and the Kansas Turnpike. We also have the Protection Services Bureau. That would include the Capitol Police, which provides law enforcement functions for the Capitol Complex and other state facilities. Special Operations Bureaus, that includes teaching staff at the KHP Training Academy, and troopers with kind of unique law enforcement qualifications and skills, such as aircraft pilots and special response teams. And these special response teams include full-time patrol service dogs and hazardous device units with explosive detection dogs. We also have the Investigative Operations Bureau, provides investigative services for felony cases initiated by the Highway Patrol. It also has the Critical Highway Accidents Response Team, which maps fatal car crash sites, often involving motor carrier vehicles, includes the VIN Theft Inspection Unit, and criminal interdiction units, often dealing with drug and human trafficking. And finally, we have the Administrative Services Bureau. That includes fleet operations, which does the issuing of patrol cars. Next slide, please. Just want to really quickly go over some of the number of sworn personnel, because that kind of comprises the strength of one of your primary security forces in Kansas. So sworn personnel, that includes troopers and law enforcement officers in the Capitol Police. KHP has 475 sworn personnel in 2024, which is 2 officers below the 10-year high of 477 in 2019. 475 troopers in 2024. That is an increase of 14 troopers above 2023. And that increase is really attributed to some of our recruiting efforts, which is somewhat offset by normal retirement procedures. Moving on to the next slide, please. Just want to talk a little bit about some of those trooper recruiting efforts. KHP graduated 29 individuals in 2023, and we anticipate graduating approximately 28 individuals in 2024. Some of the recent strategies that aid in that recruiting in 2023, our application process was streamlined a bit. We implemented a condensed training academy, so a 13-week course for trooper recruits with 3 years of law enforcement experience in Kansas. In reference, the basic academy course is typically 23 weeks, and we have assigned adjunct recruiters in the field. And in 2025, we're continuing to explore methods for recruiting. One of those is out-of-state recruitment, which we opened this year, and initiated marketing campaigns launched in several surrounding states. We've also adopted a technique of once a final offer of employment is confirmed, the applicant may begin employment at the Highway Patrol in a civilian role. So they might serve as a VIN inspector for that period while they are awaiting to start their class. So it's a way to gainfully employ them at the Highway Patrol, have them gain familiarity with the force, and not have to seek other employment to temporarily sustain them until they can start the class. All right, moving on to the next slide, please. Just want to quickly highlight some technology trends that the Highway Patrol is in the process of exploring. In 2024, we initiated several technology improvements. One of them is Earthscape and aerial video downlink, which allows aircraft pilots to store and share video recorded during flight. And it can even be used to provide a live stream to public safety entities on the ground who can get a feed of that recorded or that video from the flight, which is significant in sort of complex incidents in which an aerial perspective is useful. It's also useful as a live feed during disaster events. We also initiated online VIN inspection scheduling, which allows citizens in high volume areas to schedule VIN inspections online in advance. That's nice because it reduces the wait time for those individuals. They have an assigned time, and it also provides predictability for staff. They can get a concept of what the flow for VIN inspections will be for the day. We're also exploring the Haystacks public safety platform. The Highway Patrol uses multiple data systems. Like any state agencies, multiple systems have evolved over the years. They were started at different times, evolved in different ways. So we've engaged in conversations with this public safety platform to help provide data analytics on those different systems. And so they'll provide us a sort of a comprehensive look at some of our law enforcement stats across those multiple systems. And that is a project that is still in development. Next slide, please. So we've talked about some of our recent operations. I want to hit on some of our future initiatives at the Highway Patrol. Next slide, please. So one of the areas for concern for the Highway Patrol in the coming legislative session, and it has been in previous sessions, is the topic of excessive speeding. The numbers of drivers operating vehicles in Kansas at excessively high speeds has dramatically increased in recent years. KHP issued 3,080 citations for traveling 100 miles per hour or more in 2023. That's an increase of 1,681 above the number issued for citations for the same purpose in 2014. So excessive speeding endangers the lives of other travelers on the Kansas roadway. It increases the degree of crash severity, results in damage to the roadway infrastructure, and puts law enforcement personnel in peril. So for all those reasons, it is a concern for the Highway Patrol. Next slide, please. This is a depiction of some of those stats I just talked about regarding the number of citations issued over a 10-year period. And that graph represents a trend indicating an increase in the issuance of those citations. And just to highlight a few of those incidents just from 2024 to kind of illustrate the speeding concern, on September 6, 2024, an impaired driver with a felony warrant fled from a trooper. He was stopped traveling 151 miles per hour in Reno County. On September 10th, an impaired driver with an open container of alcohol and marijuana was stopped traveling 114 miles per hour in a 70 mile per hour zone on US Highway 24. On September 13th, a 15-year-old driver going to school with his middle school aged sister was stopped traveling 108 miles per hour in a 75 mile per hour zone in Sedgwick County. Next slide, please. So some of the methods that we've explored to help mitigate that excessive speeding trend. We will be requesting legislation in the coming session to address the speeding concerns in Kansas. Some of the possible policy options might include reintroduction of Senate Bill 476. This was a bill that was introduced during the 2024 session. It creates a new traffic infraction of excessive speeding for individuals traveling 100 miles per hour or more. Penalties include restricted or suspended driving privileges based on the number of prior convictions. Another option we're looking at is introducing new legislation that adds excessive speeding provisions to KSA 8-1566, which concerns reckless driving. Violations under that provision would be a misdemeanor with penalties that include fines of $25 to $500 or incarceration for 5 to 90 days for the first conviction. So those are just two of the options that we are exploring. We're continuing to work with some of the stakeholders to better define what some of those penalties, what the penalties might look like to adequately deter the behavior, but also be comparable to the crime. Next slide, please. Just want to briefly talk about Capitol Complex and some of the efforts we're working on here. Capitol Complex, mail security and building access. Soon the Capitol Police will assume the mail security scanning operations from the Department of Administration for certain state offices in the Capitol Complex. And likewise, the Department of Administration will assume some of the credentialing services concerning card access to buildings in the Capitol Complex. Those credentialing services are currently managed by the Capitol Police. So we're exchanging some services that the two agencies provide because they better align to what our core functions might be. Moving on to the next slide, just want to give the committee an update on the Highway Patrol Salina Campus Needs Assessment. Just as a background on this, the KHP facilities in Salina include a training academy, Troop C headquarters, dispatch center, driving course, firing range, and central evidence facility that's located on multiple sites throughout Salina. The Highway Patrol has a heavy presence in Salina. Several of these functions occupy a structure on a former college campus in East Salina. This site needs significant repair, lacks severe weather hardening, and presents some security concerns. And you can see the graphic there. That is the former Marymount College. Of those 5 buildings, those are where Highway Patrol functions occur inside of those buildings. Pursuant to House Bill 2551, KHP contracted with consultants to assess the KHP facilities in Salina with consideration given towards reconfiguration on a single campus. And a report on that assessment is due to the legislature in January 2023. Next slide, please. So this is another depiction of the Highway Patrol's presence in Salina. You can see we are located in about 4 areas. So the central concern is there's some elements, for example, our dispatch center, which functions on that former Marymount campus, is in a building that is in rough shape. It is not severe weather hardened, some security concerns. They really need an improved facility in which to provide those 24-hour dispatching services. We were looking at a new facility for them last year. The concern became, is it suitable to build a new facility on a campus that may have other problems? And is it a better solution to move all of these things into one single campus? And that's what that assessment is exploring. Next slide, please. Another initiative the Highway Patrol is currently looking at is a general headquarters. The general headquarters, or GHQ, that includes 106 employees divided among 2 buildings. You can see in that picture to the lower left, you'll see the Elks building, which is where the executive staff is located. And on the right is Jayhawk Tower, and that's where many of our administrative services are located on various floors in the Jayhawk Tower. Those 2 buildings are located at 7th and Southwest Jackson in downtown Topeka. And the lease on that space is expiring in 2028. I believe the agency first began occupying those buildings in 1983. We have certainly changed in our scope and purposes since that period. And we know the lease is expiring soon, so now is the opportunity to begin examining what we might look like in the future. We contracted with consultants to assess the physical, operational, and security needs for the general headquarters for the next 25 years and beyond. And a report on that assessment we expect to receive in December 2024. So some of the concerns with this space relate generally to some security issues. If you'll look at that picture, our general headquarters sits right next to the street. Any sort of vehicle can pull up and park adjacent to our facility. Many public safety agencies implement a standoff distance, or several parking cannot access that facility, and establishes a lengthy perimeter around the building. Some of the other concern is there really is not secure parking for law enforcement vehicles. There is gated parking, but I wouldn't consider that secure, and we are not the only entities that park in that space, which means that those law enforcement vehicles can be exposed to whoever or whatever might approach them when not occupied by a person. As part of this study, we have received some initial high-level cost estimates for that building, and for a new general headquarters, an initial estimate places that cost at $48.3 million. Moving on to the next slide, please. I want to talk a little bit about the Highway Patrol presence in Wichita. The KHP Air Support Unit is looking to build a new hangar in the Wichita area. We are in discussion with the Wichita Airport Authority concerning development of that aircraft hangar. KHP's Central Region Base is currently located in Cook Airfield near Wichita. That airfield is a private airfield. It is not a 24-hour operation, and it's actually currently listed for sale. So it does not meet some of our long-term needs for the Highway Patrol. So as part of that, we've looked at other airfields in the Wichita area. Jabara Airport provides some of the most suitable capabilities right now. It does provide immediate access to the highways and major thoroughfares in Wichita. It does provide proximity to other Highway Patrol facilities, Wichita Police, and the Sedgwick County Public Safety Agencies. The Jabara Airport also provides fuel suitable for all KHP aircraft, which is not a capability that exists for us at the Cook Airfield. And the Jabara Airport is a 24-hour operation, and it has perimeter security with controlled access into the facility. And just as a frame of reference, year to date, the Central Region Base for the Highway Patrol has responded to 279 calls across Kansas, with the majority of those calls occurring in Wichita and the Sedgwick County area. And a significant fact to know is the Highway Patrol is the only law enforcement agency in Kansas with aircraft capabilities. So we are often providing those services in response to another local law enforcement agency. Next slide, please. And here you can see a map of those airport options we were just talking about. You can see to the lower right, out in the rural area, you'll see the Cook Airfield. That's where we're currently located. And again, some limited access to the highway network from there. We are a distance from a lot of the public safety agencies. And you'll see in the upper right, that red dot, that is the Jabara Airport, which puts you in a much better position to respond in a suitable time frame. And Mr. Chairman, that really wraps up the majority of my overview. I also do have on hand some of the enhancement requests concerning the budget that we did submit a few months ago. I'm happy to share a handout on that material if the committee would like, and I can talk through that if you'd like.
I think that would be a great idea.
And I'll just go ahead and get started while she's walking through those. I'll try to go through these fairly quickly. This is the list of supplemental enhancement requests that we submitted for the upcoming legislative session. For 2025, we are asking for supplemental funding for body-worn cameras. We're asking up to $2.6 million to further support the purchase of 500 body-worn cameras. Currently, the Highway Patrol utilizes dash cams or in-car cameras, but we do not utilize body cameras. Those are an increasingly valuable asset for law enforcement agencies, so we are looking to field 500 body-worn cameras. The agency has applied for federal and state grants to support those body-worn cameras. Really, should those grants not be fully awarded, we're looking for this $2.6 million to support that effort. And if you will remember, last year we were awarded $2 million for this effort, so this would be in a supplement in addition to that $2 million for the body-worn cameras. Item number 2 is safety repairs on the Kansas Highway Patrol Training Academy in Salina. Requesting $1.1 million for urgent repairs to that Training Academy campus. Those repairs involve the replacement of deteriorating concrete caps that cover utility tunnels on that campus. And there's also a couple collapsed stairwells. So there's just some safety concerns related to the walkways on the campus that could be an obstacle for the public that use that campus, the cadets, and even staff that routinely use the campus. For 2026, the Highway Patrol Salina campus, no number attributed to this, and we talked a little bit about the needs assessment that's currently being conducted. That report is due January 13th, so it's possible that could make certain recommendations related to the Salina campus. Once we have that report and have analysis of it, that might result in an additional enhancement request. The KHP General Headquarters, which we talked about earlier, agencies requesting $48.3 million for that General Headquarters. currently lease space divided between two buildings. That lease expires in 2028. Consultants are assessing the future needs, but an initial estimate for a new general headquarters would be $48.3 million. Kansas Highway Patrol aircraft hangar in Wichita, we spoke briefly about that, wanting to develop an aircraft hangar at the Jabara Airport. A engineering study done on that estimates the cost would be $7.3 million. Flipping to the next page, you'll see item 4 is IT infrastructure improvements. There's 2 technology projects related to providing backup services and reconfiguring the servers that total $1.4 million. And then finally, item 5 is an aircraft replacement. The agency is requesting $4 million to purchase a new mission-equipped Cessna 206 stationary law enforcement airplane for 2026. This new aircraft would replace a 1998 Cessna 206 airplane. And this is kind of part of our regular 5-year capital outlay plan related to airplane replacement. And Mr. Chairman, that concludes a review of our enhancement request, so I'm happy to stand for questions.
Any questions? Representative Dodson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I want to talk about communications for just a minute. Can you kind of give an overview on the Highway Patrol's ability to interact with sheriffs and police departments as of now, particularly the compatibility of radio systems?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Dodson, the Highway Patrol routinely interacts with local law enforcement agency, be they city police or county law enforcement. That communication can occur by radio network. I think within the last 2 years, we've received additional funding at the Highway Patrol to purchase encrypted radio systems. I think a lot of the local governments also have an opportunity to apply for COVID funding to replace some of their encrypted radio systems. It's my understanding that those radio systems are compatible between the local law enforcement and the state law enforcement agencies. I think a lot of our requests from local law enforcement agencies are typically routed through our dispatch center, which has an ability to send those requests out to our field troops. And specifically those field troops and resources that are best aligned to that local entity's request.
Thanks. Yeah, the reason I asked that question is right after 9/11, we had quite a bit of federal funding that went to that end. Sheriff's departments in particular, and also national and state police. And the assessment a few years after that was that we hadn't done a very good job. We diverted a lot of funds. And I know some particular cases where we have some places where you really can't communicate at all anyway. But to me, particularly in the area that we're discussing today, which is the kind of things that happen, whether they're man-made or otherwise inside the state of Kansas, really mandate that we have communications compatibility.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Dodson, I'm not aware of any statutes that mandate currently that mandate any specific considerations regarding encrypted or interoperable radio communications. I know that the federal level does frequently provide guidance on those standards, and like many federal programs that provide funding, that's a mechanism to kind of compel people to utilize those standards. So if you want to apply for some federal funding, they require that you adhere to certain standards in communication, which is useful because it does put many people on a playing field. However, inevitably that ends up in a little bit of patchwork. There are going to be some local law enforcement agencies that have the resources, financial, and technology to support more complex communications equipment, and there are some that don't have the resources. So while I think we have the ability to communicate at the state level with many of those local law enforcement agencies, I don't know that we can communicate with all of them because it's often on them to sort of opt in to the appropriate equipment.
Representative Weigel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Riedel, for your presentation. I have twofold question. First, I think you said there were 36 seized weapons in 2003, and about half that in so far this year. Were any of those weapons altered or what I would call fully automatic?
So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Wagle, I'd have to do further investigation to know whether they were fully automatic. I'm certain some of them were altered in that the serial number associated with them may have been altered or obliterated. I'd have to do further investigation. I think you're asking, was the actual structure or composition of the weapon altered in some way that resulted in seizure? I'd have to look further into that.
Okay, thank you. The other part of the question is, you were talking about riding, speeding violations and things. And I don't know if you keep track of this. Were there any stop school bus violations or violations of the speed limit in a school zone? And if you know that information.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Wagle, that's a very interesting question, and I don't know that off the top of my head, but it's definitely worth looking into if any of those speeding citations occurred in school zones. So the short answer is I don't know, but I'll try to find out.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Buter.
One quick question is I'm looking at your FY26 ask, and comes up to around 61.4 million between those 5 line items. Is there any particular priority to those, or I'm sure they're all priorities, but if you had to place them in a pecking order, is there any one of those that is top of the list?
They're organized by priority.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Within the fiscal year, so number 1 for 2025 is the priority for 2025.
Committee, further questions? Senator Peck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just briefly, in your presentation, you mentioned you provide security for the governor and other public officials. Who are other public officials?
So the statute really just references other public officials under the statutes. For the protective services, I think we are generally able to provide, we frequently or periodically provide security for other personnel. So they may be the lieutenant governor, it may be the attorney general. In some instances, we might provide security for public officials, such as a specific state agency that is about to engage in an event in which they have concerns. So they can request those services and we can provide those protective services.
So I was wondering about legislators, if we feel threatened, or is that generally up to local law enforcement?
I'd have to investigate further whether I'm not aware that we routinely provide the protective services for members of the legislature, largely because of the volume and number of them, but I would have to look into that further.
Thank you. You mentioned that there are 25,883 speeding citations through June. I don't mind 25,882 of those, but just saying one of them is maybe something that wasn't necessary. I do have a question on page 8. This just goes back 10 years on the sworn personnel by year, and it shows 2015 as the low point. Is that the low point, or was it lower in 12, 13, 14 potentially? I just wonder if we feel we have corrected the issue with the problem we had back some years ago in recruiting troopers.
So when I look back at the numbers beyond 2015, they are generally somewhere around that level of, if I looked at 2013 and 2014, they would likely be around that 418 level, fairly consistent with 2015. So I would say looking at those numbers and trends, whatever that issue is from 2018, it would appear that we have moved beyond that.
We think it's been corrected because there was a lot of discussion in the legislature about pay, about tattoos, about various other things, and that was a concern for legislators. So
I think the Highway Patrol is in a better position. We feel positive about the position we are in right now with the number of sworn officers that we have. I think the colonel would say we could always use more, and that is an effort that we are trying to go through with our recruiting efforts, to have more officers on the road, provides better security for the entire state. So I want to say we are excited with the trend, but I think for the agency, we still see a need to grow that number even beyond that number of 475.
Mr. Chairman, final question from myself is on chart or graph 13. It shows, again, a 10-year average of 100 miles plus citations. It went up and then went down and then just went off the charts. Any understanding, any speculation, or any knowledge that is not just speculation as to why the numbers went from 1758 and 19 and then just really have gone off the charts?
So I think that number in 19 would have been probably related to some of the initial influences of the pandemic, people traveling less, and then we do see an acceleration of that. It's difficult to determine the exact reason for the increase in speeding infractions. Some of the studies that I've read, it's a change in driver behavior during the pandemic. There may have been drivers may have assumed there was less law enforcement presence, became accustomed to traveling at higher speeds. It's difficult to transition that behavior away from that. But that's just sort of one of the trends one of the reasonings that I've come across.
So we don't have accurate data, pardon me, to explain why. Because 2019 was prior to the pandemic.
So I could investigate further. I think I can't say that there's any one conclusive factor that would be the reasoning for that speeding increase.
Representative Weigel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One more bite at the apple. On your enhancement sheet on number 5, aircraft replacement, in this past legislative session, I'm trying to think, it was last year, this year, in transportation safety budgets, didn't we vote for a new aircraft for KHP with, I think it had an enhancement with the FLIR on it, or was that a helicopter?
Mr. Chairman.
You probably know more about that than I do.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Weigel, you have a very good memory. It wasn't this last session, so it wasn't the 2024 session, but the 2023 session, the legislature did authorize, I think the estimate, if I remember right, it was about $7 million for the purchase of a new law enforcement aircraft with law enforcement equipment. So it was equipped with law enforcement capabilities. Legislature approved that funding. We've gone through the process of purchasing that law enforcement aircraft. Actually, just heard a discussion today. That aircraft, that helicopter, will be arriving in Kansas this week. It will be shipped to California to have that law enforcement equipment, the FLIR camera, the communications equipment installed on it, and should be back in Kansas and operational within 2 months.
And those were replacing older aircraft at that time when we voted for that. Is that correct?
So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Weigel, that actually, typically, yes, when we are requesting an airplane, a fixed wing or a rotary wing helicopter airplane, we are replacing an existing aircraft. That helicopter was different. The legislature added that helicopter to increase. I think that takes us to 2 helicopters within the KHP force. So that was not a replacement. That was an asset added to the aircraft fleet.
All right. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you, Merrill. Next up, we have Frank Vernon, State Building Security Update. Welcome to the committee.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I am Frank Burnham. I'm the Deputy Secretary of Operations for the Kansas Department of Administration, and I also serve as the Director of Facilities Management. And I'm here today to give you some general overviews of some ongoing projects since we last met, and some additional items that are in design that you will see coming soon. I'd like to start by saying the efforts that are underway by the Department of Administration and my office are in direct collaboration with the Kansas Highway Patrol, specifically the Capitol Police, as we work together to address and improve upon the security of our Capitol Complex facilities and our employees. The first item I'd like to discuss is just the current status. In the previous presentation, reference was made to the parcel and mail screening facility. That is currently under construction and scheduled to be completed here in about 60 days, and that is out at our state print facility. That is a detached or separate annex facility that allows us to complete the scanning of all those packages that are coming into specific buildings in the Capitol Complex. That screening effort will be led by the Highway Patrol Capitol Police, and then we will continue to do the distribution and services of the mail through the Department of Administration. We are also working, or we have stood up what is called Everbridge. It's a mass notification system. It replaced what was Nixle. It was the alerts that you would get on your mobile phone if you were registered. This is a new platform, and we're in the process of enrolling all of our state employee users through their email addresses, so they will automatically have enrollment into that program, at which point there will be options for them to determine what types of notifications they wish to receive, specific to fire alarm or other emergencies that are pushed out by the Highway Patrol, Capitol Police, Central Monitoring. We are 18 months into the replacement of what I'll call an integrated solution for both the Capitol Complex cameras and access control systems. We are about 95% complete, and that is scheduled to wrap up by the end of this calendar year ahead of the start of session. And just as a background, that was replacing all the cameras, adding new cameras, making sure our systems are synced up with one another, and making sure that the Capitol Police and Central Monitoring have all the latest and greatest technology to continue to provide that surveillance and access for our facilities. We will start shortly after the first of the year, though, rolling out new credentials to replace what was our old system of our state employee ID cards. These will be the new cards that will also require new photographs to be taken of the employees. We're looking at doing those on a 4-year cycle to make sure that we have updated information. And we're also potentially looking at providing those to our state agency partners that are outside the Capitol Complex. So when they come into our facilities, they're easily identifiable by our Capitol Police and the people or other state employees. We continue to work both in our new construction and with existing construction to improve upon physical protection and barriers. Both the KDHE lab, which is scheduled to complete here in about 60 days, took into consideration physical barriers, bollards, landscape elements, again, to provide a perimeter and protection for that facility. And you will see the same in docking as the site work is scheduled to commence here soon, as that project will wrap up next spring. In addition, we are adding traffic-rated control measures around the Capitol Complex. We've already added elements in front of the Eisenhower Building, the Curtis State Office Building, and we will soon be undertaking the State House, which we will provide bollards and perimeter around the upper ring, again, to keep vehicles away from the building itself. And that will also include the visitor drop-off area. We're looking to improve that area as well. We have the equipment, and we are in the process of finishing up the drawings with the architect, but we will be rebuilding and improving all of our Capitol Complex guard stations. Primarily, we'll start with Eisenhower, Curtis, and Landon. Those will be new guard stations. They will include items like ballistic protection, secure doors for those officers, and there will be a screening process by which members going through, our employees and visitors going through public entrances will have to go through an optical turnstile, which means that employee has to have their identification card on them to screen and pass through that gate, or they'll have to go through the visitor process, which will involve something like a paper sticker that will be issued by the Capitol Guard, who will then push the button and allow those individuals through. So that is an improvement that we're hoping to have implemented early this spring, 2025, and you will see the same in the docking building once it's online. Couple items that came directly from your colleagues in previous committees that I've been in. First was to improve the State House garage, primarily the lighting. It was about a 2-year effort. We've added all new LED lighting. It's substantial. That also helps with the surveillance down there and the new camera systems that were put in place. Also, I had heard about the lack of cellular and Wi-Fi coverage in the garage, so that's something that's ongoing that we're going to be working with our vendors to improve upon. And then the other one was ease of getting into the lower section of the State House garage. So we are looking at technology there with our new system, basically radio frequency that'll work kind of like a K-tag sticker that we'd be able to issue to members that would activate those gates, because the new card systems are almost going to require a physical touch. So we need to help assist with getting through the gates and not creating that backlog. And then finally, a member mentioned the exit gate. You can go down the exit into the second level. So we are looking at putting a gate back up again to secure that lower level of the State House garage to improve the security in that area. I'd also received a question prior to this committee about what steps are we doing, not only for the Capitol complex, but what are we doing for our statewide agencies, our lease spaces out there? So I put together a few of my thoughts here. I would say, these are, of course, going to add additional costs, but I think that's something that we need to consider when protecting our state employees across the state in our leased facilities and our customers that we serve. Some of them are very simple things that we don't currently require, but could be very easily added to the RFP process. That would be requiring that emergency cards, credential cards, keys be provided in a Knox box on the building for emergency responders to have access. Installation of solid core doors or more solid construction type for a barrier protection. Providing a PDF or a general explanation as to what that state agency is, the layout of that building to local law enforcement and responders so that they're aware of what's going on in that facility. Things simple as just requiring additional perimeter lighting, night lighting, cameras where we can put cameras, parking, protecting state assets, vehicles, employee entrances, just making our employees feel safer about those areas, especially some of those remote locations. And then video intercoms or secured vestibules, we want to remain open to the public, but we do need to have a level of security that allows our employees to feel protected. So some of that could be kiosks for sign-in purposes, just simple things that we're doing here in Topeka and the Capitol complex that could be a requirement of the lease or depending upon the agency and what their needs are going forward. And then finally, would be card access, where we can do card access and we can eliminate the need for physical keys. That's just another good practice. It's something that we're continuing to implement here in the Capitol complex for control, the ability to lock down facilities. So it only makes sense to try to do the same across the state. So that concludes my comments for today, and I stand for questions.
Any questions? See none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Jeff Maxson, Chief Information Technology Officer. I believe we can start open about 30 minutes and then go close for about 20 towards the end of it. Give Ali a minute to get set up. So again, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Jeff Maxson. I am the Chief Information Technology Officer for the state of Kansas. And I'm going to give a high-level overview of both some of our IT operations, some current happenings on the IT side, and then we'll go into a cybersecurity update as well, as there's obviously a lot going on in the cybersecurity space. And then we'll go into a closed session about kind of the landscape and some of the actual specific activities we're engaging in from the cybersecurity space to help protect the state of Kansas. Should be ready to share. We are plugged in up here if you can just share our screen. There we go. Is that you guys sharing from your side? Yes, please. All right, slide, please. All right, so again, covering some of the things that are occurring with Office of Information Technology Services. We'll talk about some of the information regarding the House substitute for Senate Bill 291, which was a IT consolidation planning initiative and also a cybersecurity strengthening bill, and talk about some of the ongoing efforts with that. I'll introduce our new Chief Information Security Officer, and then we'll go into a cybersecurity update. Slide, please. All right, so one of the big things that occurred this year is in the spring, we moved from our location with the former State Defense Building down off of 27th to Topeka Boulevard on the National Guard compound. We moved back downtown to our old digs where we moved out of in about 2015. And so we actually moved out of the data centers recently, and we have repurposed that into office space. So that was exciting. So we've moved to a place where we had no windows to where we have sunlight and we can actually see the Capitol and be where the customers are. So and the other agencies. So again, it's really exciting. It was a huge transformation, but exciting to actually repurpose the data centers and free that space back up and move into it. Next slide, please. All right, so House substitute for Senate Bill 291, as I mentioned, was a large planning bill to look at IT consolidation with an executive branch and present a plan to legislature and what that looks like through governance committee called ITech, which is the Information Technology Executive Council. Slide, please. So one of the big things the bill did was it actually had changed the makeup of the Information Technology Executive Council, and it's essentially made it driven by executive branch. In the past, this was made up by the three branches as well as some other stakeholders, but we have changed it to be a little more executive branch focused. With that, it basically established my position as the permanent chair of the council, and then also changed our meeting cadence from quarterly to monthly. So again, meeting more regularly and really kind of being seen as more of an IT steering committee for executive branch and kind of taking that focus. Now, the other three branches are still non-voting members and still open to participate as well and do participate with us. And so we have held 2 meetings already. We're getting ready to hold our 3rd. And we are starting in the process of also producing policies as well for executive branch on the IT side. That is something that was a little bit slower when we were in our previous state, and we were actually moving very fast and getting new policies out in place for executive branch, because again, policies set the foundation of any cybersecurity program as well. So we're looking to do that. So as we work through ITech, one of the requirements for executive councils with 291 is we'll present a AIT planning consolidation presentation or plan to Senate Ways and Means and House Legislative Modernization Committee when that plan is supposed to be turned in January of 2026. So we have about a year out, and we are working through the processes of bringing in a consultant to help us work through that planning process to basically do a landscape analysis of where we are today, see what the roadmap is moving forward, and then present that plan to legislature in calendar year 2026. So, slide, please. All right. One of the other components that Senate Bill 291 did is it outlined a statewide cybersecurity standard that all agencies and all branches are to follow. And with this, the bill passed that the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which is a federal guidance organization through the Federal Department of Commerce, which sets quite a bit of the technology best practices for the federal government, has a cybersecurity framework that they put together, and this will become the new standard for the state of Kansas across the board. So all agencies, all branches will be expected to follow this standard. In addition, it also set goalpost or maturity levels that we are to hit at various years moving forward, which again is something that will hold everybody to that standard and gives us a roadmap forward to continue to improve our cybersecurity posture. So one of the things we're currently underway is we're getting ready to look at doing a baseline assessment against all executive branch to see where we are and see what next steps we need to do from a cybersecurity perspective. And so we'll be working through that. We'll also be doing some workshops with agency CIOs, IT leaders, and business leaders of what some of these changes might mean to them as we start putting the cybersecurity framework into effect across the board. So a lot of the bigger agencies are following a form of this with a lot of their federal compliance requirements they have to follow. But this will be a fairly big lift for some agencies that haven't had those federal compliances they have to follow. But we'll be getting a kind of a roadmap on where we need to go with that. Next slide, please. All right, one of the other big things Senate Bill 291 did was to begin putting some cybersecurity wrappers around contract language, and that first piece is ensuring that all contracts that have some sort of IT or deal with sensitive information must be reviewed by the Chief Information Security Officer. So again, this is a place where we know a lot of the work we do to provide citizen services usually requires third-party vendors to either provide some sort of IT infrastructure, provide services such as the child support services through like DCF. So we leverage a lot of third parties. And so we need to make sure we have contractual language that is protecting the state and ensuring that these vendors are protecting our data appropriately. So one of the first places we need to get in that is at the contract level. So the bill put this in place so we can start making sure we're reviewing these contracts and getting appropriate language put in there that protects the state. This will be a substantial lift because again, we move a lot of contracts, we do a lot of business that does require IT services. So we're trying to find ways on where best to insert ourselves. We're working with the Department of Administration's procurement office to identify where it makes sense for us to be put in place. And so we're continuing to work on this effort moving forward. All right, next slide, please. So as some of the other activities, again, this is going to be requiring a lot of planning on our part. We're continuing to develop specifications for a vendor to come in and assist us with this gap analysis and planning project. Obviously, we have a year to get this done. We'll be looking at using some of our remaining ARPA money to bring this vendor in and cover this initiative. But again, there's a lot of states that have gone through similar efforts to do IT consolidation. And so we're hoping to bring somebody in who has already done this with another state so they know where to really move faster. And so we're not reinventing the wheel and starting from scratch. So we're hoping to get this kicked off here soon. And also what this will do is assess current IT spend across the state. We're working on that ourselves as well to see how much we're spending, where we're spending, and what we're spending on. And then also addressing the cybersecurity staffing and cybersecurity funding that is being done within specific agencies as well. So real high level, I know that's a lot. I know we want to definitely cover the cybersecurity, but I do want to stand for questions on the area of OITS.
Any questions? Representative Dodson.
I think it was this last session, but I know in our Commerce Committee, we had some heartburn with what we're doing with Department of Labor, particularly with the contracts being led over to administration. So when you're talking about you having input, overview, supervision over things that contain cybersecurity ramifications, do you then coordinate with the Department of Administration, or do you have sole authority over those things that pertain?
Thank you, Representative. That's a good question, Mr. Chairman. So this is something that is just new as of this fiscal year, so as July. So we're trying to develop the process and where we need to insert ourselves and provide recommendations, working in concert with procurement, and then advising the agencies of things they may be missing in either their RFP specifications or their contractual languages. They're building that with the vendor that has been awarded to. So we're trying to find the best appropriate place to insert ourselves and where we can make sure we are addressing as many of those contracts that may have concerns. So how we do that is if we need to do some sort of risk assessment on the type of project, does it deal with a lot of sensitive information? Is it high dollar? We may have to look at metrics on where we need to focus our efforts because of the volume that comes in, but we are trying to work very closely with procurement to make sure we're catching as much of it as possible.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Committee, further questions? See none.
All right. Thanks, sir. All right. Next slide, please. All right, I'm going to introduce our new Chief Information Security Officer, John Godfrey. He is not a stranger to the state, so he is replacing me as I have stepped fully into the CTO role away from the CISO role. So you guys do not have to hear me all the time about cybersecurity. I am still very interested and still have a huge role, and so is near and dear. But I do want to introduce John Godfrey. He'll cover the next session. So John has spent 10 years with the University of Kansas Medical Center. So he was their CISO for the past 10 years, or 6 years as a CISO. So not a stranger to the state, so has been within the state system. I have worked with them for a number of years, even prior to him stepping into this role as he was a peer in another state agency. And was also most recently the CISO and resident founder of Lionheart Cybersecurity Advisor. So we're excited to have John. He was able to step in, hit the ground running, pick up where I had left off. He knew most of the players and was able to really, he's bringing a lot of things to the role to keep us moving forward. So I'll let him step up and go into the cybersecurity update.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairperson, members of the committee. Next slide, please. We'll go one more. So I'm going to start off and talk a little bit about the state and local cybersecurity grant program. We call it SLGCP, in case you've heard that acronym before. And in fiscal year 2022, we spent part of that time building the actual plan. And for each fiscal year period with this plan, we actually have 4 years in which to award and spend the money. And the committee, we formed a committee that recently met specific to fiscal year 2022. And we reviewed 74 applications that totaled $4.73 million in requests. And the state of Kansas has submitted funding requests for 60 of those projects. And so this was really a really large turnout for interest across the state for city and county and local and K-12 organizations looking for funding specific to cyber. Committee was very proud to say that they were able to make recommendations on 60 of those, and that will fund about $2.34 million. And the projects are going to predominantly benefit areas in rural Kansas communities. Fiscal year 2023, we have submissions that are going to be opened up early next calendar year to start accepting applicants for that. And we're looking at $5.4 million to award there. All right, next slide, please. One of the areas that, in terms of critical infrastructure, you've probably heard all day about critical infrastructure, the importance it plays, how there's increasing attacks on critical infrastructure. One of those areas in Kansas that we've been doing a lot of work on lately is operational technology, specifically with water and wastewater operations. And so in July 2023, the Kansas Information Security Office, or the KSO, and KDHE and our CISA partners formed together to create a strong partnership and a unique approach that you don't see really across the rest of the United States to try and combat these cybersecurity challenges related to public water systems. In January 24, we did educational awareness and training sessions across the state. We completed 9 of those. We continue to do ongoing support through workshops, helping operators formulate incident response plans and performing testing. This was all born out of an EPA memorandum issued in 2021 that identified challenges specific to public water systems and the ever-growing cyber threat posed to them at that time. And what's really interesting here is this unique partnership that we formed. And it's so unique, in fact, that Kansas is leading the nation in their approach to cybersecurity. Well, our approach is still fairly unique and in its infancy. As we've been talking to other states and especially federal partners, there's a lot of interest in what we're doing here and how this may be able to be scaled across other places in the U.S. Looking towards the bottom of the slide, you'll see too that external individuals have started to recognize this approach. And so this is an area that we're pretty proud about our ability to really materially impact whole estate cybersecurity here in Kansas. In 2024, some of those training sessions, just to give you an idea, we held those in Hayes, Garden City, Salina, Wichita, Pittsburgh, and here in Topeka. Next slide, please. Speaking of training, part of our outreach through the state is to help increase education, build empowerment, and give people the skills they need to help secure the state writ large. And we're proud to say that one of our classes that we held is the SANS 401 Security Essentials class. It covers things like network, endpoint, and cloud security. It's a 60-hour, very intense training class. And we had 44 participants in this class, 8 state employees, 12 county employees, 6 municipal employees, 14 school district employees, and 4 court employees. These classes, we work with our partners at the Adjutant General's Office, and we're able to take some of the Homeland Security grant dollars and use that to cover the cost of these classes to make it available for people across the state to attend. And for this particular class, we utilized the Heartland Preparedness Center in Wichita. And so that was exciting to be able to use that facility to bring this class together for folks. Next slide, please. A couple other classes and training that we've done. We held a Certified Ethical Hacker class, or CEH. It's a 40-hour training class, still intensive. For this class, we had 2 sessions, and we had 15 participants in each session. So another 30 people across the state that we were able to provide training to help bolster our cyber defense across the state. TEAX, which you'll see next on the list, stands for Texas A&M Engineering Extension Service. And we held the AWR 383. It's a cybersecurity risk awareness for officials and senior management. Held 2 sessions of that, 24 in the first and 18 in the second. And we've received positive feedback about that particular class. Next slide, please. A couple other things just to keep on the horizon. So later this week, we will be having our 6th annual Governor Cybersecurity Summit for executives. So on October 9th, we'll be holding one for the cabinet agencies. On October 10th, we'll be holding one for the non-cabinet agencies. Lastly, new to us is the Kansas Critical Infrastructure Executive Exchange. This will be November 7th, held in Wichita at the Heartland Preparedness Center. And the idea here is to continue our work in critical infrastructure cybersecurity by bringing a larger section of critical infrastructure together, have some discussions, work through cybersecurity scenarios, and really see how can we take the lessons learned there and move that forward as they go back home. Next slide, please. Jeff touched on this a little bit earlier about policies. So House Substitute for Senate Bill 291 reflects that the executive CISO shall establish the policies to protect the branch's information technology and infrastructure. I'm proud to say that we've been doing just that. And so with the monthly ITech meetings that we've started, we've now introduced 2 sets of policies. The first set in August, the second set in September. And there's been really good discussion and collaboration on those policies. Once the policies are finalized, ITech will take final action to adopt and enact the policies. And we'll continue introducing new policies in future meetings. And to give you an idea, there's been 13 policies introduced across the last 2 months worth of meetings. And so pretty important progress there, I think, when we look back across, the policy progress prior to that. Next slide, please. Lastly, wanted to touch a little bit on the Security Operations Center, or SOC, as you may hear it called. And this has been something we've been working on since the appropriation for additional staff has been made. So we've acquired additional space to place the folks that will be working the SOC. We have our furniture ordered. We continue to do work in preparation for some of our cybersecurity tools to really allow these staff to take advantage of the tools and meaningfully do the work that's expected. And so work continues there about developing and tuning those tools. And then lastly, we're getting ready to post and begin hiring for these positions. And so looking forward to bringing them on board to continue to help with our cybersecurity identification and response activities that we do. Next slide, please. With that, I will stand for questions.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Does the SOC operate like a NOC? That is, you do network monitoring, make sure there any anomalies are visible and action taken?
Correct. So, Mr. Chair and Representative Dodson, great question. You're correct. So much like a NOC monitors the network, the SOC here is going to be monitoring a whole bunch of our security tools, a bunch of our logs, and they're going to identify those anomalies, and then they're going to start to take that initial triage and action on those anomalies. So that way, the idea being that we can detect and then respond even quicker, as opposed to, maybe taking even longer to detect and then respond. These folks will be, that's their focus, that's what they're going to be watching for, and then they'll be able to jump right in.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Committee, further questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
I believe we're, I believe we're ready for closed session, Mr. Chairman, on our side.
You're wanting about 20 minutes, you believe?
Yes, sir.
Representative Smith.
Chairman, I move that the open meeting of the Joint Committee on Kansas Security be recessed for a closed executive meeting pursuant to KSA 75-4319A to discuss matters related to the Kansas Information and Security Office's security measures with the appropriate individuals pursuant to KSA 75-4319B12C, because the discussion of such matters in an open meeting would jeopardize such security measures, that the committee resume the open meeting in room 548 South of the State House at 2:45 p.m. and to record this motion, if adopted, as part of the committee's permanent record.
The motion, do we have a second? Seconded by Senator Ware. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. We'll prepare We're back in open session.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Stand for any further questions, but do like to appreciate the time coming in front of you from the Security Committee and share what we can and share what is going on. So again, we appreciate the time being in front of you today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have operational and security update. Robert Stewart.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for having the KBI here today. We always appreciate the opportunity to give you our perspective on crime statistics in the state of the KBI. My name is Bob Stewart. I'm the executive officer for the KBI, and I have brought a parcel load full of KBI executives and new employees along to witness the process and to provide expert testimony should you need it in any areas that I can't cover. As you know from the schedule, I've probably got about a half an hour to talk to you about some of those things, and then we're going to go into some closed session to provide you an update on some of our fentanyl techniques for fighting fentanyl that I think you'll find both interesting and enjoyable to have that conversation from some of our frontline folks. And then, of course, we'll have an IT audit review after that. As most of you know, the KBI has been in existence for quite some time. We came into existence in 1939 at mainly the request of the Bankers Association and the Livestock Association because of the crimes that were being committed in the state of Kansas out in the non-urban areas, out in the rural counties, particularly where cattle rustling and bank robberies were going on in small communities. So the KBI was authorized by your predecessors in 1939. Today, we have about 300 employees, give or take, 100 agents, 100 that are in our criminal justice information services and support team and analytical services and our IT division, and about 100 in our laboratory division. So that's not, those are, of course, rough numbers, but that gives you a general breakdown of who we are and how we exist. KBI agents are authorized at the same level as a county sheriff. In other words, we can investigate any crime that's on the books in the state of Kansas, where we see it and when we encounter it. So we have original jurisdictional authority as we see it. We use that to some degree, but quite frankly, we use far more often our secondary capability, our other capability, which is that of assistance to local law enforcement. As you've heard the director and me testify about previously, the vast majority of Kansas law enforcement is under 10 sworn law enforcement officers, and 50% of our law enforcement agencies are under 5. Now, certainly, in those situations where they have a major crime, homicide, or a major drug problem, that very quickly overwhelms a small department or a small sheriff's office. That's when they call the KBI. We can bring in both manpower and expertise. We also bring in techniques and capabilities that the small departments simply don't have the manpower or the funding to deal with. So that's the majority of the work that we do across the state. One of the other big pieces from an agent's perspective, we also investigate almost all of the officer-involved shootings in the state of Kansas. So if an officer in a community in our state gets involved and discharges his or her weapon, they call by agreement, the KBI is the investigative agency that comes in and handles that matter, investigates it fully, provides that information to the district attorney for a charging decision. We don't do any of the policy decisions about whether that shoot was in policy or not. We simply make a criminal determination about what criminal laws were violated, if any, and move that forward. Pardon me, I have a PowerPoint that should be ready to go. I think you all have a copy in front of you, and it should pop up on the screen. The objectives of my short PowerPoint are to talk about some of the crime index crimes that we have. Next slide, please. The crime problems that we are seeing, that are continual, and then to talk about some that are off of the normal schedule that we see. Crime statistics theoretically should be relatively easy to capture and to be able to articulate to. In reality, it's much more difficult than that. And I will start with what they call the crime index crimes that we use at the KBI, but we get those from the FBI. Those start, they're broken into two categories. Next slide, please. They're broken into two categories, violent crime and nonviolent crime or property crime. These come from the FBI definitions, and these are what are sent out to all the states. And you can see rape, murder, robbery, aggravated assault and battery are in the violent crime section, those four, and in property crime, burglary, theft, motor vehicle theft, and arson. Now, in the state of Kansas, when the KBI collects the data that you've required all of our state and local partners to send to us, we have pretty good response rates. In fact, this year, we believe that 97.45% of the population of the state of Kansas has been properly covered by those local departments providing the data that they're supposed to provide. So we feel real comfortable that we have got a pretty fair snapshot of the big crime pictures in the state of Kansas underneath those 8 categories. Now, there's some problems even with that. What you and I might think of as a rape, a prosecutor might not charge as a rape, or might not be written on the initial police reports as a rape. It might be a sexual battery. So sometimes, especially in instances of rape, aggravated assault and battery, some of those stats don't get well captured simply because of the fluid nature of a criminal case that's going on between the officer that first shows up, a detective or a KBI agent that shows up, that then it gets to a prosecutor, and those charges evolve over time, sometimes getting more complicated and more significant, and sometimes devolve and get less significant. That's just how that process works. So capturing these in kind of a one snapshot piece gives you an artificial sense maybe where some of that sits and where some of it doesn't. Worse yet, probably, I think KBI statistics are pretty solid, and you can take good account of what's going on in Kansas. When we look at a nationwide picture, it's a little bit more difficult. The response rates nationally are much worse in a lot of places. A lot of departments don't define, in state laws, don't define these crimes like we would in Kansas or like the federal government does when they think about it. So the Federal Bureau of Investigation's crime statistics, they have to use a whole lot of data manipulation and data supposition in order to get to what they think are good numbers. I'm not suggesting that they aren't good numbers, but they have to sort of apply some data science to it to get to what they think are good numbers. They're not quite as good as I think our numbers are that we've got such a solid response to. All that said, with statistics being what they are, I want to jump into what they look like. Next slide, please. That's the total crime index chart for the last 10 years. And you can see that we had gone down and we kind of peaked up a little bit. That's all 8 put together. So we're at 78,927 last year, and we're up 80,076 this year, covering all 8 of those categories that I just mentioned. You can see it's fluctuated over the years, and we are currently below the 10-year average a little bit. Next slide, please. Broken down into violent crimes, you can again see that long trend of uphill increases in violent crimes has bounced back and forth the last 3 years, and we are now back down, which is, of course, good news. If you break it down further, this year we had 157 murders that were sent in as statistical points by our law enforcement partners, compared to 168 the year before. So a few fewer. Over the 10-year average for homicides, we're down 3.3% over homicides over the 10-year average. Rape statistics, we are down. Last year we were at 1,281, and this year we're at 1,120. And that's as low as the rape statistic number has been for the last 10 years. So that number is going down. I will talk more about that in a future slide. Robbery also is going down. We're at 1,097, which is nearly half the number as they were in 2016, 2017. We peaked in 2016, 2017 at a little bit more than, right at 2,000 robberies listed a year, and we have steadily gone down since 2015 or 2016 to where we are now at 1,000, around 1,000. The one that has gone up and spiked a little bit of the violent crimes is ag assault and battery. It's the opposite trend. Just as I said, the robbery trend has been going down, the ag assault battery trend has been going up. And we are now at a 4-year high of 10,920 aggravated assaults or batteries in the state of Kansas. So sometimes these stats kind of lay over each other, and sometimes they don't. But that's where the violent crime stats sit currently. Next slide, please. Property crimes is where, the first slide I talked about the overall increase in crime. Property crimes where it's coming from. Our property crimes index is going up quite frankly, the area it's going up the most in those 4 is auto theft. We're not sure if that's just a straight trend that's going up, or if one of the things that we see in law enforcement is sometimes people don't report theft or burglary. More often, they do report auto theft for insurance purposes. In order to get insurance payments, we find that the rate of actual auto thefts and the rate of reported auto thefts is much closer than the rate of actual theft versus reported theft. If you walk out to your car and your briefcase has been stolen, what are the chances you're going to call the police and deal with it? Versus if you walk out and your vehicle's gone, you're definitely calling the police. So we have a high level of confidence that the property crime numbers are going up pretty much across the board because of the auto theft numbers versus what people feel like they can report numbers. Next slide, please. I've talked about the 8 index crimes, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that I've missed, right? I mean, we haven't talked about a number of areas that neither the KBI tracks very well. We don't get those reporting in from departments in the same fashion we do those 8 index crimes, nor do we track it nationwide. The FBI doesn't have tracking of some of these things. And that's one of the first categories is crimes against children. We've talked about in the past, and I know you're familiar with it. That slide there, all those pictures on there, all those children are Kansas children that are missing. And that's not all of them. So that's just a picture of it. One of the things that we break it down into sort of 2 areas. And it's kind of a false divide when we think about crimes against children. We think about crimes against children where there's physical contact happening, where they've been sexually or physically abused. And we talk about child pornography, which is online exploitation of children. I would say to you that I don't think that those distinctions are really a valid distinction anymore. From a law enforcement perspective, one of the things that we're seeing is those offenders that start with child pornography are starting to identify and target children in their neighborhoods or in their homes at an alarming rate. So rather than thinking of these as 2 different piles of offenders, we think of it as a crescendoing effect, where starting with child pornography, they move into physical contact and sexual abuse. Not to diminish the crime of child pornography at all, it's the starting point, moving on to what we call the Jessica's Law crimes. When we think about it at that starting level, for lack of really a better way of putting it, one of the places we do get good statistical coverage from is from NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They're a nationwide organization. They're considered quasi-governmental, but they're really on the private side. They have run a tip line for a number of years. And that's one of the ways they judge. It's not the greatest way, but it's one of the ways they judge what the crime levels are looking like. And they can tell us that since 2021, the number of tips that come in about child sexual abuse material, CSAM, or about sexploitation of children online has increased 300%. So if our starting point of this crescendo has increased 300%, what can we expect is happening with those people that are trying to target children in their homes or neighborhoods to make that problem even worse? It's a significant problem. Next slide, please. The way that the KBI, with your help, has dealt with this, we still do break it kind of into 2 areas. We break it into the physical sex crimes against children, what we call Jessica's Law. That's KSA 216627, which is the set of laws that allows us to go after all the physical touching, the sexual abuse cases. We have the child victim unit that we have in all 3 parts of our organization. We have agents that are assigned to work those cases. They average 35 investigations a year. They're complicated, long-term, difficult investigations. They start with, to be able to interview a child requires the courts and the specialists that deal with it say there's a certain way you want to interview a child. Obviously, you don't want to lead them. You don't want to scare them, but you want to try to find a way to get the truth out of them. So there are experts out there that do nothing but interview children that are in these situations. And we have rooms that we call soft interview rooms in all of our locations, where you could have a child come in where it doesn't look like what you see on TV with a bare desk and a handcuff ring and big cameras. It's designed so that it's a sofa and the microphone and camera are hidden in such a way that the children will be hopefully more comfortable being dealt with by a professional forensic interviewer. So that's part and parcel of the child victims unit that the KBI operates. Next slide, please. The other section that we deal with does involve the child sexual abuse material, does involve sexploitation, does involve the online activity. And as I noted, that's grown 300%. We think from the NCMEC numbers in the last 3 years. Our investigators and the analytical team would agree that those numbers are continuing to grow up to grow in ways that they find terribly startling. Last year, you all agreed with us and funded the third branch of our Child Victim Task Force, which is going to be located in Pittsburgh. So the green area on the chart didn't have much coverage until last year you authorized that capability at the KBI. We have just sworn in a class of 18 new agents that are going through the months-long class to become a KBI agent, and at least 2 of those are already pre-assigned to go down to be part of that Pittsburgh team. A supervisor has been assigned, and we're developing some space down there in the interim, and we'll talk about the Pittsburgh space in a little bit, but in the interim, we're starting to fill out that space. The West region, which you authorized 2 years ago, is already up and operational, along with the one that has existed the longest, the Northeast Child Victim Task Force. So all 3 parts of the state, as the KBI breaks them down, now have coverage to deal with this area of criminal activity that we find concerning. Next slide, please. I don't want to take the thunder from our closed presentation, but I do want to bring up a little bit of conversation about the drug problem in the state of Kansas. I would always commend you to look online. Their high-intensity drug trafficking area, HIDTA units, are multi-state federally operated units, and we belong to the Midwest HIDTA. Kansas does. And they produce online, available for any of us, a number of great reports that talk about the crime problem, that talk about lots of other issues, what their assessments are from their perspective, but also gathering information from state law enforcement partners, but state first responder partners as well. So some of the drug overdose statistics that we use, we get from HIDTA. So it's a great resource for you to be able to access online. And my written handout has a link to it. Fentanyl is still the #1 problem, according to our internal research, as well as what HIDTA is telling us. So it's consistent in our belief. At the same time, methamphetamines are still the drug of choice in Kansas. And the stat that we use, probably that best indicates that, is from our laboratory. All the submissions that go to our KBI laboratory on Washburn's campus, we have pretty good sets of numbers with that. And we can tell you, with fentanyl, in 2017, there were 30 positive tests for fentanyl. Last year, there were 953. In fiscal year 2024, there were 1,047. So we went up 10% more from last year in the number of positive fentanyl tests we had. At the same time, we had 4.5 times the number of positive methamphetamine tests. So still getting more positive methamphetamine tests by a factor of 4.5. We had 4,756 positive methanol tests. But that number is going down while the fentanyl number is going up. So just so you kind of sense what the significance of that is. And I know in closed session we'll talk a little bit more about that. Next slide, please. I wanted to talk, last year, the committee asked a question about the sexual assault kit issue, and I wanted to address that with you all this year. The slide that you had there, you could see 3 categories. The blue category are what our lab categorizes as normal course of business submissions of sexual assault kits. So that number has kind of stayed the same, although in 2023, it went down a little bit. The red bar is all those, most of you remember the whole sexual assault kit initiative, where there were departments that were taking them and then not submitting them for testing. Those all are those red ones, and they were in backlog for a while, but you could see that in 2021, the KBI completed all of the ones that we were aware of that were submitted. Then the third category is the yellow category, and that arose out of House Bill 2288, which required other submissions. So that number is now, the departments are starting to comply with that law, and we're starting to see that increase, but it's starting to go down a little bit. We're a little concerned about maybe why those numbers are going down. We wonder whether attention to submissions is necessary again. And we think we have a little bit of a solution at the KBI for that. One of the things you authorized in our enhancement package last year was for a LIM system, a laboratory information management system. The LIM system at the KBI is that we currently use is old and it's hard to update at all. In fact, they're kind of keeping it together with some duct tape to keep it functioning with all the current technology that we have. You authorized last year the acquisition of a new LIM system. Part of that new LIMS capability will be able to track sexual assault kits from birth to death. So the KBI will acquire them, we'll provide them out to the departments and to the emergency room facilities and anybody else that asks for them. And then the KBI LIMS system, we believe will be able to track them from that birth point all the way through to submission to us. So we'll be able to see if there's a catch point where a department, has got 3 or 4 that that haven't been submitted properly. What it should also be able to do is allow victims to be able to access and see their sexual assault kit wherever it sits, be able to access online, say, okay, it's still at the police department, or it's at the KBI lab being tested, or it's on the shelf now waiting for trial. Wherever it is in the system, hopefully that kind of problem will be addressed by a new LIMS system that you've authorized last year. That is currently in the bid process as we speak. Next slide. This is kind of the follow-up on those same numbers. These are what the lab indicates it's completed. So you can see, comparing the two, that our lab is trying to turn these around in 30 to 45 days to get them done, and then either available for prosecution or to be available into the data banks should this be a repeat offender that they catch and want to go back and track. Next slide, please. One of the other areas that I don't think that gets tracked very well is the whole area of domestic violence, stalking, and sexual assault. The right side of that slide is the front page of about a 100-page publication that the KBI puts together based upon all the stats that we get from our partners in the state of Kansas. And I don't think it gets talked about or utilized nearly as much as it should. It's one of those problems, I think, that we think about those big 8 crime index problems, and we don't think maybe as much about the domestic violence, stalking, and sexual assault cases that are going on in the state. And they remain a significant number. So I would, again, commend you to go to the KBI's website and find that 100-page document. It can answer more questions than I could possibly have time to answer. But I did want to point out a couple statistics in there. Next slide, please. One of the things it tracks is all those homicides I talked about. The number of domestic homicides has kind of gone up over the last 10 years, as you note on this slide. But the thing that startled me is that there were 32 that were considered by local law enforcement, homicides that were considered by local law enforcement to be domestic violence related. That's 20% of our homicides in the state of Kansas. I think that's a significant thing to mention to you as you think about how we deal with this problem in the state. And it's consistent. I didn't mention it last year in testimony. I don't know that I was paying attention to this particular document that we provide, but I saw it and wanted to bring it to your attention today. Next slide, please. Another area I wanted to bring to your attention briefly was juvenile crime trends. We are also seeing these go up a little bit, which is always concerning. Certainly in Kansas, the law allows us to prosecute as an adult anybody over the age of 14. At the 14-year-old age, you have to be certified as an adult. States around us have different laws. Some of them are 12 or some are 13. But no child in Kansas can be prosecuted as an adult unless they're 14. And a lot of those crimes go all the way up to 18. But our numbers of violent crimes, and those are violent crimes, numbers are significant and got quite a bit worse in the last year. Next slide, please. This is a complicated slide. It's hard to read, and I struggled with how to present it to you. But I wanted to kind of point out one area that I see here, that we see here is problematic. These are, based upon the statistics that our partners provide us, the type of weapon and age that our juvenile offenders are using. So these are violent crimes where weapons are used. And if you look at it, you will see that the yellows across the top, those are 13, and then the pinks and purples are 14, the pinks are 15, browns are 16, grays are 17. So that's how they break down in terms of the ages. And I draw your attention to the handgun one and the knife one and the personal weapons one. So hands, knives, personal weapons, fists, overpowering somebody. We see a significant number of 13-year-olds committing crimes with weapons, either their hands and fists, with a knife, with a handgun, that then cannot be certified as an adult in the state of Kansas. Again, just a matter of drawing to your attention for where things are currently going, or it seems like they're trending in the state of Kansas. A couple other updates I wanted to give you before I talked about some organizational issues that we have. You have asked about and have been validly concerned about the updating of what used to be called the AFIS system, the Automated Fingerprint Identification System, into what is now the ABIS system, the Automated Biometric Identification System. That process was difficult, both on our behalf and on behalf of the contractor that we picked to provide it. The director 7 or 8 months ago now, I think, put a particular emphasis on making sure we got a product done on time and done properly. We can now report to you that most of this it's a green system. There's still some kinks that are being worked out in particular areas, but by and large, the ABIS system is now operational and doing what we need it to do, and what both we and you think is appropriate, but also what our KBI partners who set some of the rules regarding the ABIS system also concur with. As I was sitting preparing for the presentation, I was thinking, you are aware of a lot of the changes at the KBI. Certainly Director Mativi, who's been here just a touch under 2 years. And when I started looking at the numbers, I was startled by the organizational change that we've had. I, of course, am new to you, but the director, the associate director, who only counts as half because he used to be me and moved to associate director, so we'll count Robert as a half of a change. 2 new assistant directors, me, a new executive officer, a new HR director, a new chief information officer, a new information services director, and a new general counsel in the last 2 years. So that's 8, 7.5, depending on how you do the numbers. The ones that have stayed the same are Robert, who's got the institutional knowledge, our CFO, who's been around 8 or 9 years, our lab director, who's been around quite some time, and Robert. So the number of executive level KBI folks has significantly changed. Some of that change was a new director happened. Some of it's retirements, some of it's selecting new people for a job. There wasn't any one particular reason, but the once very long, stable KBI now has got a lot of change. So we're dealing with that change both from every way you can think of as leaders. How do we communicate with each other? How do we communicate with you? What do we prioritize? How do we prioritize it? And we're seeing some issues. And one of the things that you're going to hear at the end of the day today is the IT audit of the KBI and areas that we need to work on. And we think that part of it is in part due to some of the changes, but some of the new ways of thinking about things. With all that change, there has been organizational change. The director has reorganized how we look at things and how we address them. Now we have the director, we have an associate director, and we have 3 assistant directors that cover all those areas that I talked about. So we've streamlined in a lot of ways and put some strict requirements under those assistant directors to ensure that we're meeting the obligations that the citizens and that you all have of us. So we think we're good going forward. As I mentioned previously, we have the second largest class of agents we've had in memory, which is 18 moving through, thanks to your support. And so we think we're going quite ahead. I wanted to take, that's what I have in terms of the formal presentation. But I do have, much as Merle had, I have a list of what we were thinking about in terms of our budget enhancement requests. If you would like me to provide those out as well, and I can talk about those, sir. While those are being passed out, I will tell you the big one on the list is the bottom one, and it's apparent to us. As I mentioned, we started in 1939. The building that the KBI's headquarters is in currently was built 9 years before the KBI came into existence. It was built as a junior high school in about 1930. The KBI took operational control of it in 1984. And then in probably 10 or 11 years later, we acquired a building across the parking lot from it that used to be the kids' playground that has a building on it. We have a number of issues. That building is now outdated and no longer capable of meeting the needs that we have as an investigative agency. So our big ask this year is going to be a state law enforcement center at Kansas Bureau of Investigation headquarters. We are doing some preliminary work with an architect firm who's doing a program analysis and a space analysis. Their very preliminary numbers at this point are about $93 million, not including land acquisition fees if we have to acquire land. So it's a significant request. I will tell you, and I have to do this carefully, I'm not sure if the director came, he did. I have to be careful about how I say this. Our building built in 1930 has a belfry. And the director of the KBI has bats in his belfry. We have a bat problem in our belfry and in our fourth floor attic area. That's just it's funny, but it's also not funny. That's significant, and that sort of it shows you the kind of facility that we're currently in. We have a lot of space that is not proper for how we can try and communicate with each other. We certainly have a security problem. The statistics are showing that law enforcement centers are the subject of physical attack, planned physical attack by bad guys these days. Now, while some of us carry badges and guns and can defend ourselves, a large number of our employees do not. Yet they're going to be targeted potentially, and we don't have any real security capability at the space that we have. There's no place to put a fence. There's no place to put any sort of set-offs, as Merle was talking about, where we can take care of our people. So that, not only is our facility falling apart around us, but it's also just not capable of being secure in the way it needs to be in today's day and age. That's the big request that we have there. The other requests, as you know, there are two KBI sets of employees that are on what's called a different pay scale, a CPP plan. Those are agents and scientists. Every year, they move up in rank, either by experience or by in the lab. They meet certain requirements, like they get a PhD or they go do training. They move up. That means a pay increase, which we have to ask you for every year. So that CPP increase, the pay plan increase is there on listed as one. Number two is KBI cybersecurity. One of the things we noticed in our reorganization, and we noticed, as you will see in the audit review you'll get here momentarily, is that we have some shortcomings that we need to deal with. One of those is simply in the number of IT personnel that are at the right pay grade and that we can attract into work. So we want to address that significantly. We also have a storage area network issue. We have three, and I think one of them is very outdated. The other one is sort of outdated, and the last one is okay. But that redundant system inside of what's called a storage area network, we need to replace, and that's not a cheap task either. And then finally, as part of Senate Bill 291, we read that as requiring a chief information security officer and a chief information technology officer. So of all of our asks, those are the only two bodies we're asking for, is to fill those pursuant to what statute now requires. From a lab infrastructure, the number three is lab infrastructure. One of the things that we have are a number of complicated pieces of equipment over there, right? And they're very expensive. Some of them are called gas chromatography mass spectrometers, GCMSs. I'm looking at Kyle back there because he's better at this than I am. 4 of our GCMSs are more than 15 years old. They can't be updated anymore. In fact, the companies that made them are no longer servicing them. So we have employees taking time away from their lab time to fix the machines to keep them running. So we've got 4 machines that we need to update, plus another machine called a QTOF, and you'll have to just beg my ignorance. I couldn't explain a QTOF to you if I tried, even after I just had it explained to me. But it's also a piece of equipment that we need a backup redundant system of. All told, that's about $1 million. And we noticed when we were doing some of our reorganization that our entry-level lab technicians, we cannot keep them. And what we found out was that our partners at KDHE and at KHP and others, the entry-level positions that would be a lab technician position are significantly paid significantly more than ours are. So we need to adjust that so that we can keep the lab technicians that we have in our doors. The last piece of that is the offender registration compliance. As you know, sexual offenders are required to report any movement where they move, and as citizens, we're allowed to check against that. The system that the state now uses, called ks.gov, was built in 2007. It, as these other systems that we're talking about, no longer functions as well as it ought to. It doesn't allow the interface for the local departments that are taking the fingerprints of the offenders that are coming in their doors to handle it as well. The director is looking at several different options to fix that problem, but it's our best estimate at this point is it's about $500,000 to fix the system we have or to get an off-the-shelf system from one of the contract providers that's out there. So those are the operational the enhancement requests in a nutshell that we're going to be coming to this body for in the coming session. With all of that, I will stand for questions.
Any questions? Senator Ware.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good to see you again. And on some of these issues, it looks like we're trending the right direction. I'm so pleased to see that. Remind me one more time what the acronym LIMS?
Laboratory Information Management System.
Okay. And then on the sexual assault kit charts, I didn't quite follow what the yellow bars were.
The yellow bars, as I understand it, not last session, several sessions ago now, 2020 or 2021, you all passed HB 2288. And House Bill 2288 was designed, it basically requires law enforcement agencies to submit sexual kits. It didn't, I think the issue was that the initial backlog, you all worried would happen again. And so you added Senate Bill 2288, which addresses the bill. It says, no, you can't do that anymore. Law enforcement agencies have to turn them in. So that's that yellow number is showing them turned in. And we're separating those out from the ones that have always been properly separated out, which are the properly provided, which were the blue ones. So what we think is those yellow ones, they aren't being turned in, hadn't been turned in the 30-day period they were supposed to be. Under House Bill 2288, they've got 30 days upon collection to turn them to the KBI or to another lab to properly analyze. So that number is still, I mean, you could see that in 2022, it was pretty big. So they were still catching up. It's going down now. And we're not entirely sure why, whether that just is going away or whether there's a backlog somewhere that we need to address.
Okay, I'm still not sure I understand exactly what it is, but it amounts to rape kits that haven't been processed in some manner or another.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Well, are we talking, on the chart you say sexual assault kits. Does that mean rape, or does it mean more than rape?
It can be any of them where there's a collection, and I'd have to get back to you on what exactly the full set of requirements is that the department can use or that a hospital or emergency room or other healthcare provider can use if they believe that there's evidence that can be collected vaginally or from underwear or from wherever that they can use. So it may not be a penetration rape, but the facts may still show that, hey, there's genetic evidence there that might be useful in a court of law. So certainly I would say more than just rape. Sexual assault would include any time where there's the possibility of collecting DNA. And that may very well be skin samples. You know, somebody scratches somebody and sends their fingernails. So there are lots of possibilities.
So something of that nature that's going to a lab to be tested.
Yes.
Okay. And then one last thing. I did a little math, and it looks like we're actually, the numbers on the first sheet are actually 9 higher in the red than on the second, and yet we show 0 after that. If my math is correct, I got a difference of 9 between the two. Anyway, so I was just wondering how 9 became 0.
From which two? I apologize, ma'am.
The two charts.
Oh.
The red bar of the two charts.
I do not know the answer to that. I will provide one.
Thank you.
Senator Cluse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Bob, so much for presenting again. Appreciate all this. The question I have, so is this actual KBI stats then? I mean, is this generated by your research and what you guys do, or is this someone else doing it and bringing it to you, or?
This is our Criminal Justice Information Division taking all that information in from all the departments. And that gets submitted a bunch of different ways. It can be submitted the old-fashioned way by paper. They can electronically submit it. There's some other ways that it can be submitted depending on how complex and capable the department is. And that's that 97% number I was talking about, that the reporting. So that's from all of our state and local partners. That includes KBI data. It also includes Peabody, Kansas, and Overland Park. And
okay, all right, that helps me. And then and maybe it's already within these stats with all the violent offenders that have crossed in from the border illegal. Is those numbers any of crimes committed reflected in this or not?
the current way they get reported to us doesn't capture a data field that indicates immigration status. So we don't have a great way, other than the stories we hear, we don't have a great way of actually tracking numbers to show this is the number of crimes committed by undocumented aliens.
So the other agency, law enforcement agencies, wouldn't necessarily give that as...
They may or may not, depending on the sophistication of their system.
So we don't know the percentage, in other words?
We do not, sir.
What that could be. Okay. And then the final one, thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. You said 300% increase, and I thought you made reference that those were just children in Kansas since 2021. Was that correct?
No, sir. That NCMEC numbers, they don't break them down by state. That's their total amount of income. That's their percentage increase that they see to their TIPS line between 2021 and now. So that 300% increase is indicative of whether it's from Pennsylvania or from Kansas or anywhere in the United States.
So do we have a breakdown for Kansas or a percentage, or are you aware?
Not that the KBI tracks. We can tell you stories, right? We can tell you that, for example, they come in, the way NCMEC distributes them, they kind of distribute them to hubs. And Wichita, for example, the police department has a person that's assigned to intake those and then deal with the ones that are in Wichita. He will tell you that when he leaves on Friday, his inbox is empty. And on Monday, when he gets back in his inbox, he's got 40 to 50 new NCMEC referrals in there. Just as a snapshot example of the numbers that are coming in the state. All of our investigative teams say we're fully busy and we could hire more people to do this job just based on the number of tips that come in. Now, understand those are just tips. Some of them validate out as actual crimes, some of them don't. But that's the number of clues or tips that come in.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? President Dodson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Look at your chart labeled violent crime. I understand the down 4.6 or whatever it is. But if you look at 2014, we're up 50%. So I don't want an agency to get the frog in the water complex here.
Understood.
You know, are we comfortable with 13,000? Was 9,000 too many? So something's happened. It doesn't mean it hasn't plateaued for 3 or 4 years, but what happened since 2014? We didn't grow.
If I had the answer to that, I'd write a book and make a whole lot of money. I don't mean to be glib about it, sir. I think that there are a lot of complicating factors. I think, social media is one. Education of our young people is one. Differences in socioeconomic status is one. I mean, there are lots and lots of pieces to that puzzle, why it seems worse and why some of the numbers show that continuing to go up. There's an argument to be made that maybe our punishments don't equal the crimes like they ought to. I mean, I think you could probably, every one of us would have an opinion about why it seems to be at issue. And even inside the KBI, when I would sit around and have coffee with my colleagues, we don't have a consensus opinion about it. It's a matter of lots of these pieces of the puzzle that kind of escape all of us as to one exact reason why. It's lots of little pieces, I think. And I think you address it like we're addressing it. We take the most serious issues and try to deal with them in the best way we know how, with your guidance and support.
Most of my career has been dealing with solutions. And I just want to make sure that we are identifying solutions to the problems that we are presented with. So I would encourage you to take a look at what's happened since 2014 and figure out if there's something that we can do, both as KBI and as law enforcement agencies and other agencies that inform the public. I mean, 13,000 is a lot for a state our size.
I agree, and I know my colleagues agree as well with your position, sir.
Thanks, Mr. Chair.
President Bueller, do you have a question? Senator Ware, one final question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question about the juvenile crime trends.
Yep.
The numbers say they're going up.
Yes, ma'am.
Could there be factors? I mean, there are no doubt a lot of factors involved with that, just like what we were just talking about. Does that automatically mean that kids are more violent now? Or could it be some kind of a change in aggressiveness of arrests or definitions of crimes or, something like that as well?
I can answer at least part of that, and I think the answer is the same in that there are a lot of factors. But the definitions haven't changed. That I can tell you. In terms of enforcement, I don't know that we've perceived a difference in enforcement levels with juveniles. So I wouldn't want to completely rule that out as a possibility, but I think it unlikely. I'm not sure why we see a 300, a significant increase like we saw in this last year. Maybe it's one of those statistical anomalies, and next year it'll get better again. I don't, to address Representative Dodson's point, I don't know that we want to whistle past the graveyard and ignore that.
I move that the open meeting of the Joint Committee on Kansas Security be recessed for a closed executive meeting pursuant to KSA 75-4319A to discuss matters related to security measures with the appropriate individuals from the Kansas Bureau of Investigation pursuant to KSA 75-4319B12C, because the discussion of such matters in an open meeting would jeopardize such security measures, that the committee resume the open meeting in room 548 South of the State House at 3:50 p.m. and to record this motion, if adopted, as part of the committee's permanent record.
You heard the motion. Do we have a second? Seconded by Senator Peck. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Any other open session questions? Senator Peck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did have a question on the white paper that you had provided to us with the information that you indicated that on murder, there were 157 murders reported in 2023, 168 in 2022. Does the KBI have the ages of the murder victims, or do you not have that information as to the age of the victim?
Yes, that will be part of the data set.
So if a guy or anybody beats a pregnant woman and she lives, but her baby dies, you have that age? So you don't know if you classify that as That would be considered a murder, right? A homicide of the child? Okay. Well, my point, Mr. Chairman, is we have where we can charge a person with double homicide if they kill a pregnant woman and the baby dies as well. Yet we have over 20,000 murders through abortion in the state of Kansas. And that's not part of his report. But when we say that there are 157 murders, it's more like 127 or 20,157. Just a point, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Committee, further questions? Seeing none, thank you, Robert. Yes, we're going to have to go to the closed session. Do you know how long you need for the KBI? Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that the open meeting of the Joint Committee on Kansas Security be recessed for a closed executive meeting pursuant to KSA 75-4319A to discuss matters related to the Kansas Bureau of Investigation's Information Technology Security with the appropriate individuals pursuant to KSA 75-4319B 12C, because the discussion of such matters in an open meeting would jeopardize such agencies' information technology security. That the committee resume the open meeting in room 548 south of the State House at 4:15 p.m. and to record this motion if adopted as part of the committee's permanent records.
You've heard the motion. Do we have a second? Seconded by Senator Ware. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Back into open session. We have one question that needs to be asked in open session. Representative Weigel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The question, I'm trying to frame it correctly. There was 3 dates in there where they were looking at audit. And 2022, there was a spike in expenditures, but there looked like the full-time employees were pretty much same in all 3 of those years. And I didn't see any other explanation for that. So I'm just asking what was going on there with that. Okay. Thank you.
Is your microphone on?
It wasn't. Thank you. Sorry. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Would you restate your name and position and start?
Yep, no problem. So my name is Paul Weisgerber. I'm the Chief Fiscal Officer for the KBI. And to answer that question, the reason for that spike in 2022 was due to early debt payoff of the bonds for our Forensic Science Center. So that's why it spiked in that one year. We paid off those bonds early and then it went back down to normal. Yep.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Committee, any further open session questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. We have our next closed also. Alex, do you know about how long we think we need?
About the same, 15 to 20 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that the Open Meeting Act of the Joint Committee on Kansas Security be recessed for a closed executive meeting pursuant to KSA 75-4319A to discuss matters related to the Kansas Department of Education's information technology security with the appropriate individuals pursuant to KSA 75-4319B 12C, because the discussion of such matters in an open meeting would jeopardize such agencies' information technology security, that the committee resume the open meeting in room 548 south of the State House at 4:40 p.m. and to record this motion, if adopted, as part of the committee's permanent records.
Heard the motion, do we have a second?
Aye.
Committee, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Representative Dodson. I believe this is his last in-person committee meeting. Appreciate your service to the state. Also, we want to be sure that we keep in mind that we need to be thinking of things to put in our report tomorrow so our discussion doesn't take forever as we're going. With that, is there any other business to come before the committee? Jared, you're going to have a replacement for tomorrow?
Mr. Chair.
Sorry, Representative Owsley.
Representative Shu will be in my place tomorrow. I'll be on the Building Construction Committee tomorrow. So
Thank you. Appreciate that.
I may pass along some notes for recommendations.
Excellent. Appreciate that. With that, seeing no further business to come before us, we are adjourned.